What's up, everyone? Welcome to Normal America Show. I'm your host, Robnoerr. Special show tonight. I'm going to start trying to do an interview show on Thursdays with people that I find interesting. I have a great show tonight with someone I find very interesting. I don't know what title he would go by. I think he would call himself an ANCAP, but Libertarian ANCAP Kasimir, who I've never officially done a debate with or as a partner or against each other. But we've been on a lot of different shows together. He's called in while I did debates and things of that nature. So I was on the panel with them election night in Fabian Liberty. So I think it'll be an interesting show. The purpose of these Thursday night shows is more of an interview style. I'm not going to say there won't be disagreements, but it's not really a debate. As such, I'm not really bringing on people that I know I vehemently disagree with, like partisan Democrats, because if I do shows with them, it'll be more of a debate format. So the idea is to have an interview format, a different type of show on Thursdays. Depending on the guest, we'll go whatever time they're comfortable with, up to 2 hours. And leave them sort of steer the conversation, sort of like you might see on Joe Rogan's show or something like that. Doesn't mean there won't be disagreements and things like that, but that's sort of the idea. So I'm very happy. There's always, when you're working out sort of a new type of show, there's always bumps in the road. And so I'm glad that Kasimir's agreed to sort of be the guinea pig, the first person in. I do really appreciate it. So I'm going to get this set up. If you're all going to lose me here for a second, video-wise, and then we'll bring Kasimir and do a brief sound check. And then the plan is this will be live stream, but also I will record it and then upload the recording on its own with a thumbnail so that it's on places like YouTube and Rumble. So he'll come on and we'll just shoot the breeze for a couple minutes, do a sound check, and then at 9 p.m. proper, the interview will start. That's the plan. So I just wanted to, most of the time it will be starting at 9 p.m., the Thursday show, and the guest will be here when it starts, and I'll do the sound check and stuff like that in the background. But because this is the first time, I just wanted to give people an idea of what's going on and what to expect. Also, and I'll announce this as the show begins, audience questions will be much appreciated. And I will be happy to ask Kasimir or any future guest any questions that I find appropriate. If I don't get to every question, understand that's not because I didn't like the question or anything. It's just depends on how many questions I'm getting and how fast the chat's going and things like that. But all right, you're going to lose me visually for a second. Let me set up the whereby. Oh, yeah, we're good. We're good. The other thing is I am going to have... so you can't see the text as we're going here. And the reason for that's quite simple. Kasimir's cool. He wouldn't care. But the idea is that I want to make sure that, any guest that comes on, particularly if there's someone that's like, has a job or something that stands to lose, I don't want to risk, groypers or some crazy left-winger saying some stuff that they'll, regret their employer seeing or something like that. I will be reading your chats, though, I promise. So, please do continue to send those in. There we go. What is this going on? Oh, come on. Why is the camera not working? Give me 1 second. Oh, that's why. I screwed it up. There we go. Come on, Rob. This is why I'm glad it's Kasimir the first time. Because I'm an idiot. I am an idiot. There he is. What's up, man?
Hey.
Oh, right. Yeah, sorry. Because you're the first guest on this show, I'm already live, but I just explained people what to expect, and I figured you wouldn't mind. So we'll do a sound check, and I'm going to record it and put a thumbnail and everything up. So we'll start properly right at 9 p.m. But
how's my sound right now?
it sounds very good. Your mic sounds very good. So audience, you can hear both of us. The levels are pretty close, I'm assuming. check.
Can hear you fine, and I think I'm trying to disable all the streams so I don't
Awesome. Yeah, and if it starts to lag or whatever, I'll let you know. Also, I assume you won't mind, but I told people any questions or comments that they have, feel free to put them in, and I'll be happy to ask. I didn't talk to you a lot before this. The idea I had, I'm glad you're the first guest, because the idea I had for the show was, it's not we might disagree, but it's not a debate. It's more you're steering the show. I'm just the host interviewing. So we're talking about your ideas. And the idea is I only want to bring people on that I know that I'll agree with positions or positions that are non-political, because it's my platform and I don't care to give partisan Democrat hacks. If I'm talking to them, I want to debate them. So that's the idea. It's not
Absolutely.
really... If we disagree, we disagree. That's fine. But it's not, and it's, I think a lot of people don't understand. Like I've seen, for example, BPF interview Vosh, and people are like, well, why didn't you go at him? Well, an interview is different than a debate, right? The whole purpose of an interview is I'm just here to facilitate so the audience can understand the topics you're talking about and I can understand them. That's sort of the idea. So, what'd you think? So we got 4 minutes just to mess around. What'd you think about the way the election ended up panning out?
Hard to say. I'm not gonna use the word, so I'm going to say that I'm used to it. I'm used to it. I pointed to the country that I have some heritage from, Russia. I'm used to bad news. I'm used to the regime asserting itself in the most ugly manner possible and just saying, oh, "What you gonna do about it?" So.
Yeah. I think that maybe we'll talk about this a little, but to me, I think the worst part about it is you can already see this sort of regime narrative, which is, well, the problem's populism. The problem's sort of libertarian Republicans. We need to get back to a Mitt Romney, Jeb Bush, era Republican Party. And that to me was always the fear of Donald Trump, that if you ever did get someone within the system that potentially was an outsider and they failed, then you're farther behind than where you started, because now they're gonna dig in and say, oh, whatever we do, make sure that it's Bush versus Clinton. Make sure it's of that ilk, and you get to choose between puppet on the left or puppet on the right. So to me, that's what the election really represented. But
for sure,
I'm gonna go fill up my. Go ahead. I'm gonna fill up my water.
You are
real
very
quick,
blurry on this platform. I don't think you are on others.
My camera.
Yes, let me check if that's the same thing that I'm seeing on Twitch. No, you're fine on Twitch. It's just here, which is fine.
Oh, okay. Actually. It looks, my audience, do both of us look clear on the... Now, eventually what I want to do, Kasimir, is I'm going to go to Fiverr and pay for a song. Someone just to make a song that's just the intro, and then I'll put a little graphic up. I got to come up with a clever name, though, for like Thursday night interview. I don't know. We'll think. I'll leave my wife do that. That sounds like... I'll be right back. I'm just going to fill up my water, and then we'll get going.
No problem. Do the same. Moment. 1 second. See if I can do this.
By the way, we'll just go in order of the topics you sent to Aftershock.
We're probably going to stick to the first one, I think.
Yeah.
My plan is to sort of, I'm an unknown on your channel. I'll introduce myself briefly, maybe give a little bit of my background, and then my idea is I'm here to connect and to briefly introduce some of the ideas that are driving my analysis.
Yeah. Achilles, a frequent viewer of mine, says, we're both ugly, but we're coming in crystal clear. So thanks for that, Achilles.
Excellent.
We appreciate it. Your camera is not malfunctioning. This is how we look. So, all right, 1 second here and we'll start then. I'll come in. I'll cue it. Welcome, everyone, to a can't think of a clever name for this show, Thursday night interview show. I'm named to be determined later. The very first one, set up, produced by my good friend Aftershock, who's always helped me with production issues. I couldn't be happier than to have friend of the show, Kasimir, be the first guest. Kasimir's a libertarian. I'll leave him introduce himself and his political philosophy, because libertarian, as I'm sure we'll discuss a little, it's one of those words that can mean a lot of things. He is someone that I've interacted with on The Crucible. I was on on a panel with Fabian Liberty, election night, was talking to Kasimir a lot. He's someone that I value as a very intelligent person. And although we have sort of differing political philosophies, I think that probably 85 to 90% of the things we agree on. And I think it's always great to have people explain themselves from different philosophies that maybe I don't have the history of or sort of the ins and outs. And I think libertarianism and ANCAP is one of those things where people want to pigeonhole it and say this is what it means. And when you talk to someone who's intelligent, you oftentimes see that it's not being represented adequately. So thank you so much for coming today, Kasimir. Thank you for being the first honorary guest. And I hope there's not too many production issues. I think we're going to get through it just fine, though.
No, I think that's going to be fine. I hope everybody can hear me fine.
Yeah, it sounds good at my end. I think every could. So I thought we would start with this before we get into sort of the topics we're going to talk about tonight. Can you explain a little who you are, what your sort of political ideology is, and how you started to get into a foray of sort of advocating for some of the things you do?
Right. So I'm an American citizen. I live in Escape from New York, which is my joking way of indicating my location and where I plan to be. I have immigrated from a brief stay in Israel, though I originally was raised in Russia. So my heritage is Russian, Jewish, some Austrian, and in terms of culture, I'm very much a European, Western European. And so I'm sort of trying to bring some of the best of that to the United States. Although my attitude is, I think, quite heavily is to never mess with something great too much. I still sort of see myself as partially a guest, even though most of my life was spent in this country. So I have that level of respect. If I am trying to offer some kind of a correction, I have to have very strong reasons for it. In terms of politically, I can tell you that 6 years ago, when I first joined Discord politics initially and sort of started more seriously exploring political topics, I was a classical liberal in I don't know if you can say the best sense of that word. I would debate against childish ANCAPs on Discord, destroy them with facts and logic, and not pay attention to that ideology much besides the memes. I voted for, I think, Obama the second time he was being elected. The reason for that was because I didn't have really a political party I was affiliated with. We're still very angry about Iraq, Afghanistan. And the Republican Party didn't present anyone who was different. I didn't think that Romney or McCain were that different. And so I made that mistaken vote. But I did vote for Trump, and I am currently voting straight R as much as I can, except when there's a libertarian around, and then it becomes a really tough question that I have to calculate. Voting is always a little bit utilitarian. I like to call it hostage voting. I'm a hostage. I don't get the best choices. I have to pick the one that causes me least pain. And I can't be too idealistic about it. So that's the origin. If you have any questions.
Well, I was going to say that's something I hope we get into, because one of the classic things that you hear as a comeback to an ANCAP or someone who's very libertarian is sort of, if you withdraw from the system too much, then that's a win for the system, right? So if you say no government, therefore I refuse to participate, the worst parts of the government are like, sure, great, yeah, go ahead, go live in the hillside, and then when we feel like it, we'll come abuse you and take your rights away, but you won't have any collective movement to be able to stop. So I always think it's interesting how to thread that needle, right? To say like, look, and if you're listening and maybe you're not familiar with ANCAP, which I don't claim to be very much, think of it as someone like Ron Paul, right? Ron Paul, for example, was against these pork projects, but he would oftentimes include them in legislation. When asked why, he said, why should the people that I represent suffer? Because every other representative is putting pork in the bills and doing things that advocate. So I hate it. I want to eliminate it all. But if I'm forced to participate within this system, then I have to choose. I can't just say, "Oh no, my people will get screwed over." I always kind of look at it like that. That it's like
Sure.
Ron Paul was never like saying, "Yeah, I want these pork projects." He was saying, "No, I desperately want to get rid of them all. It's just I have to operate within this system right now because." And I think that's how I always. Would you say that's a fair sort of on the lines of?
Yes, we're not agorists. So somebody who's completely wants to disconnect would be an agorist. There is an I like the community of beachy Amish, or yeah, and those isolationist communities. I greatly respect them. I think they're doing a great job showing that pacifism can work, that voluntarism can work really well in the community. That it's not like a false basis for society, but I do view them as vulnerable. Eventually, the state will come after them. It's already beginning. Like I can already tell you some stories. If somebody heard about the Miller farm, for as one example. So, no, it's not for disengagement. And I can give you another example of how sort of libertarians of my type think. Disenfraal, his channel is sort of very hardcore ANCAP. We disagree on some small details. And he would explain that during his life, he paid probably, some millions in taxes. He's working pretty well. So he considers that total amount as something that he can extract back for any program he wishes. And if he ever extracts too much, he has to pay it back. Mm-hmm. He views it this way because it's like that money is yours. So that's about it. But
let's talk about the specifics. So you would call yourself a Hoppian ANCAP, correct? And
absolutely.
Can you explain us, like, give a crash course for someone that maybe has a vague idea of what libertarianism is, but what exactly specifically is Hoppian ANCAP, and maybe how that differentiates from sort of like the Gary Johnson libertarianism that we saw as, the primary libertarian that was running for president in 2016, I believe.
You're right. So I want to start actually from the end point. What we have arrived is that we have what we believe is a very strong theory of rules, of laws, laws that come that are founded on the a priori laws of logic, on things that that cannot be really coherently argued against, and so from that we arrive at a system that allows, like a tool that allows us to determine what is with the rules or against the rules. In day-to-day speak, it's legal or illegal, but it has other meanings when the state is around. But we can call somebody a criminal if he violates those rules. Now, those rules are descriptive. They're a priori, meaning from some prior that cannot be argued against. They're not based on observation. They're based on on purely logic. And they're value neutral. That's very important to understand. So my values are not libertarian. My values are just my personal values, my cultural values, my desires for society. What libertarianism does is it says, these are the legal moves I can move through to still call myself a libertarian. And if I violate those rules, I will have to call myself a criminal in that instance. And I have to do something about that. So...
what I'm understanding is something like this. Your values, for example, might be, I'm pro, gay relationships.
Pro-life.
I don't have a problem with that, right? Or I'm pro-life. But what you're saying is, I cannot enforce those values through the mechanism of the state. So sort of your belief, you're not calling your libertarianism your values. You're saying, no, that's a priori. That's even before the values. Your values are your values. What you're saying is the framework through which you evaluate. Most of us use the framework for saying, I'm pro-life, and therefore it justifies X, Y, and Z. But you're saying, I can't say that. My value of being pro-life comes after the a priori framework, which says I can't enforce that through mechanisms of the state.
Yes, I can, and it's not just, it's particularly the word state. We'll have to define it. The state is defined exclusively as something that is fundamentally built on aggression on the initiation of coercion, on the initiation of violence, somebody who performed a crime to get into their position of power. And in some sense, all states are currently such. They're not voluntary governments. They're highly coercive in how they started. They claim a lot of territory that doesn't really belong to them in any rational sense. And so you can legalize them. We have writings on how that could potentially be done. We have theories on how we would want it to be done. But right now, they're not such. That's just the reality we live in. Legal in our sense of that word.
Right.
So let's say that, an example, if I'm pro-life, then how do I deal with the reality that some women want to abort? Well, there's legal writings on this. People are trying to understand what's actually going on, and what they found out is that we cannot be in our theory against the eviction part of abortion. At least that's a gray area. At the very least, it's a very gray area. And the side that is in favor of evictions, meaning the removal part, is fully supported in the theory. It seems to be quite coherent. But we are strictly against the murder that's involved in the actual act. So I don't want to go into the gory details.
Right.
But they can be quite gory in the last trimester. So that to us is like murder, and we would be happy to convict you for murder, and that deprives you of a lot of your rights as a murderer.
How does that when you say conviction, right? There's an idea that will become confusing to me, because if we don't have sort of a government or a state, what does that look like? Because I think that's something that people need to understand. A lot of people think, ANCAPs would say, might makes right. If you want to punch someone and take their stuff, that's okay. There's no government, there's no police. But that's not what you're advocating. You're saying
we're the exact opposite. We're saying that might just makes might. The right part is the propaganda of the state. Now, a lot of libertarians, just out of habit, because it's always conflated, use the word government when they're saying the bad stuff. The state, the government. So let's propose a different word, governance. Can voluntary governance exist, and how does it look like? So the Amish community, if they find out that one of their members divorces, they don't have any enforcement mechanism just through their religion, through their moral system. They cannot engage in violence to do anything with that person. But they can completely disconnect from that person in their society. And they believe they have the freedom to do so. Meaning total ostracism. That person is non grata anywhere. Nobody will do any business with them. And that alone, that's the enforcement mechanism that's legal, because it's you're not doing anything strictly against them if they violated your morals. They didn't do anything illegal. But you also aren't forced to interact with them. So we have a lot of theories on which type of governance can be established, which one will likely be optimal. Hans Hermann Hoppe, I call myself a Hoppian, as in his student, indirectly, hopefully directly at some point. He has this phrase, 10,000 Liechtensteins. So if you look up Liechtenstein, it's a state, it's a government at least, and his sort of vision, his imagination is that that's what it's going to look like in action. There's going to be some people that want to isolate from everybody or want to be on the margins. You should probably allow them to exist, interact with them, but mostly societies want to live in communities, and communities have to scale. So you will have groups of hundreds of people federating with groups of millions of people federating with groups of billions of people. That will happen. It's just that you will always have the tool of evaluation of what's actually going on. Did it break the threshold into a criminal relationship, into a crime based on our system? And if it does, what do you do about it, and how do you deal with it? That's like a separate question.
So
I think this. Okay. Sorry, just one more bit. I think people understand why it's important. When you're arguing in debates with a leftist, they're utilitarians and they have this idea that there is some greater good that can be calculated, and that's the basis for figuring out what's right and wrong, what's legal and illegal. And that is like a backdoor to introduce just as much violence as they want in any given situation, with arbitrary thresholds that just fit their mood. We believe that that's like a core damaging thing that rots society. And so there was an initial desire, like a value desire, to try to find some objective basis for all of this. So you can say, no, this is the line. And beyond that line, you're just being unreasonable. We can call you out as such. It's quite separate. I'm sure your chat has many objections. It's quite separate to answer all of your objections. Like, how is pollution going to be handled? How is war going to be handled? Even if it has to be handled through a state until we figure out how to not do it through a state, you should still be, my desire is for everyone to at least understand our point of view, and sort of try to implement it as much as possible.
Yeah. So we're talking to, my guest is Kasimir. He's a Hobbyian ANCAP, which is a form, what's that? Hoppian.
Not Hoppian.
Yeah, Hoppian. Not, yeah, Hobbiton. Yeah, Hoppian. Yeah, we're sort of discussing what that philosophy entails. Here's a question I had, because I think it would be boring, like you said, to get into the, well, what about this? What about this? A question I have is, do you think that sort of an over-reliance on governance in the state is natural? Because it seems like when we have these more, my understanding of this is people have a natural urge to kind of live in collective societies, like you said, to, we're cultural creatures. And so does it seem like as you got enough that the idea of government was born? Do you think that it was natural that we got where we at and it just got too far? Or do you think that there was something unnatural about that that led to where we're getting?
So it's both. I think that there is a natural inclination. It's very healthy to live in the community. There's even possible some science trying to quantify how many people, how many faces can you reasonably handle, and where it starts going slightly off the rails. I think the number is around 300, 200 people. But beyond that, there is something unnatural, malicious going on. If you look back in our history, we used to have a lot of communal institutions of mutual assistance, a lot of voluntary governance that existed. And then in the United States history, and then in the same United States history, we have a history of their systematic removal. Removal by people with various intentions. Some intentions are good, some intentions very nefarious. And so what you have in your mind right now, and what I had in my mind for the longest time, was the education that I received from the state, the narrative that I received from the people that popularize these ideas, the philosophers that they promote, and all of those institutions, all of those people are they're paid money to promote the status quo, to promote its ideals, to promote its false justifications. And we now live in an environment where we believe that all of this is natural. That it's natural that we're at this stage. It's natural for us to have a central bank that devalues our currency all the time, right? It's not natural for us to trade in hard stuff like gold, like promissory notes, like actual custom financial products. It's also not natural for us to occasionally lose money on bad bets and then learn from it and become stronger. It's natural for us to give up a third, a half of everything that we're producing and have someone else decide for us how it's distributed. That's natural, right? So I think you will find a lot of people argued for stronger forms of enslavement in the past using similar argument. Oh, it's just natural. How can we live if we don't have thousands of people working the plantations? It's only natural. Look, every single empire, the Roman Empire, the Mayan Empire, the various empires of Christendom, they all had some forms of coercion. That is also, by the way, the beginning of the lie, because they didn't, not so much. The level of coercion wasn't the same. The level of taxation wasn't the same. If you start looking back in history, you will find some curious anomalies with those statements. But that's the narrative, right? Natural.
Right. Yeah, and that's because one of the big criticisms is it's inevitable, right? That if we, even if somehow you could snap your fingers and we could end up in sort of the idealistic ANCAP society, human nature will inevitably bring us back to where we are. And I guess the reason that I think it's important to think about these things is, I don't think that's a reason to reject, because even if you are a fan of different forms of government, you listen to someone like Thomas Jefferson that said in a healthy society we needed a revolution every 20 years, right? He wasn't saying, well, we set these parameters and that's it. What he was saying is you should always be distrusting. You should constantly be vigilant. And I think one of the reasons that we're so bad now, wherever you fall on that sliding scale of how much state should exist, what happens is, I think exactly what you're saying, that we've just became complacent. I'll ask you what you think of this. One of the things that I thought when I was a Ron Paul sort of Republican was this idea. When I was talking to people, they would say, well, what we need is compromise, right? And the Ron Paul people need to compromise with these leftist people. Well, the leftist people are basically saying, we want 100% control of your life. And Ron Paul's basically saying, well, we want almost no control over people's lives. So what's the compromise? Giving them 50%? And then once you do that, they're like, okay, now that we're at 50%, we still want 100%. So what, you compromise? And I think that's what happened. We took these slight steps, and in our heads, we're like, yeah, it's just natural to have these giant bureaucracies that are taxing us trillions of dollars and then spending it as they see fit, as the middle class shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. And the next thing you know, your tax dollars are going to things that you have no belief in whatsoever. In fact, it's antithetical to your belief. Foreign wars, or, weird study projects, abusing animals or something for studies. And people are like, well, that's not what I believe. Why am I being forced to contribute? So I think it's interesting. What do you say to sort of that compromise narrative where people are like, well, you can't get everything you want right now, so you should make compromises? Do you see it like I do, that basically they'll never stop saying that?
Yeah. Oh no, that's. I think the best people to look for answers to this particular question is the NRX crowd, who are inspired by Hoppe to quite a big degree. The neo-reactionaries, people like Curtis Yarvin, and I'm forgetting the other names right now. Aaron McIntyre is somebody I follow on Twitter, and he understands it really well. Their idea is that once you have these systems, they will always naturally shift left and never shift right ever again. I think they're sort of right. I predict that if there's the collapse of that system, it will turn right wing as fast as possible, as my friend Scott says. Is this Scott saying that, or someone else? Problems that are solved. No, it's Jim Bob actually saying that. Problems that are solved by starvation. It's like as soon as you start starving, suddenly you'll become really right wing about your food sources, really right wing about science, really right wing about everything, right? Because that's what actually solves the crisis. So how does it? What is happening? What's happening is that when you have this institution, it has to. It has to somehow account. It has to figure out what to do, and so it will ask the expert, and the expert is probably going to be some academic, and that academic is going to have a system of incentives. If he says something pointless like, "Oh, we shouldn't worry about this climate change issue," it's just going to pass. It's not going to affect us greatly. He's not providing any value in his message, and we don't need to pay him any more money. So he's not saying anything important. So let's not pay him. Let's not finance him. However, if he suddenly rings the alarm bells and he says, "No, you have to do something now, and here are the ways you can do it, and all of those ways are giving us more power," then we're incentivized to promote that person, whether his reasons are rational based on empirics or not. That's the incentive structure of the state. So a compromise is never possible because the way they gather information always incentivizes one direction, to the left in terms of total control of the economy, to the left in terms of regulation, to the left in terms of destroying institutions that are um, voluntary and based on your, deontological systems of belief, like Christianity, like because they're competitions, so they have to be sort of suppressed and eliminated. All the 7 deadly sins are heavily promoted in the media because, again, their promotion gives you both the initial benefit, but also power over the people you control. Let me see.
I think I think when you're saying this, something that comes to mind, I always talk a lot about, it's cliche, but the idea that politics is downstream of culture. And one of the things I think about when I hear that is some of the worst sorts of abuses and censorship and things like that, where people can't truly be themselves, is self-censorship. And it's sort of because we've set up this cultural framework that says, well, even without the state intervening, this is what you're allowed to think and you will be ostracized, etc. And so it's interesting to hear you say that, sort of how this compromise only goes one way. Do you see sort of, if we would go to more of an ANCAP society or go towards that direction, do you think that idea of self-censorship is something that people would feel freed up from? Because a lot of it is just the sort of collectivist state type mindset that's forcing these values on people. Because I think there's an awful lot of things that we just accept culturally that if you could really get into people's inner thoughts, they wouldn't accept, but they feel pressured through our culture to accept this stuff.
I think that exists. It's very hard to make predictions because, listen, the main prediction is that there's going to be groups of everything, and there's going to be various experiments, and we should allow them to happen. So we should allow, for example, the anarchists that are smashing bank windows, if they really want their own commune in Portland, the best compromise that we can have is we can isolate them and ship them off possibly into that area. Declare that area as theirs, compensate everybody so that everybody else moves out, and let them experiment with their society to the extent possible, and say, we're not even going to trade blockade you. We're just going to let you live, but you have to be self-sufficient to some degree, and you can't, run to us for help every 5 minutes. And let that experiment run. And similarly with any other, extreme group that you consider extreme, that I wouldn't even allow, them to speak on my platform, I still would want them to run their experiments somewhere else. The most crazy groypers, right? The worst thing we can do is accept this idea that we should always living alongside them, and that we should always interfere in their business. No, find we have a lot of space still. Find some space, start your life there, get investors, and if you're right, there's going to be something good about your movement. There's going to be something that will work out. If you're wrong, we'll find out, right? And then you'll have to integrate with our rules. There's no reason why somebody in New York, in my city, in Manhattan, let's say, tells people in Brooklyn how to live exactly. There's no reason for us to have the same legislative body. And it's particularly bizarre when somebody in Washington, D.C. tells somebody, some native person, some Indian person in Alaska, how to live their life, how to mine for gold. You can have a question about pollution, but the idea that somebody in D.C. just flat out shuts down the program without performing any justification, just because they can, because they're the Environmental Protection Agency, to me that sounds like really, really bizarre. So it is very, in terms of free speech, right? What is free speech in our system? It's like Discord. You show up, Discord without the Discord overlords, I mean. You show up on robnoerr's Discord, you obey a contract. If you don't like the contract, you get out. That's it. He wants more free speech, he will expand his contract. He wants less, you'll have less. It's a bit more complicated with social media because they're not really private companies.
Right.
You don't. This is another difference. We're not like we're not Ben Shapiro libertarians. We're not left libertarians that or we're not corporatists like from Cato Institute, who believe that a corporation is some saintly thing that you can never criticize, and
I
that
hate Cato.
they're good for some things, but
Right.
But why are they wrong? Because you should look at the priors. Where do they get their money? Where are they funded from? How much percentage of their business comes from the state? Do they have a department where the FBI calls them directly and says, hey, that guy is saying things we don't like, shut him down? And if they, no particular thing will give them the identity of a state agent. Maybe one particular phone call from the FBI that has a gun to your head, it's not a problem. Right? You just have to deal with it. But if you didn't set up a cannery service, if you keep accepting all the contracts, and if you keep on accepting just openly interaction with the state and all of its various manifestations, and you get state protection, why do we call you private? In some philosophical sense, just the fact that you have a group of investors investing in your corporation already makes you not private, because private implies one decision maker, privatus, classically, right? Everything else is some form of socialism, for good or for bad. Not necessarily the Marxian kind, but it's some form of social organization that already, drawing from neo-reactionaries, what's the problem with social organizations? They suffer from the iron rule of oligarchy. Naturally, what's the natural part? Naturally, people delegate rights. They delegate opinions. You delegate to robnoerr. You don't spend as much time researching topics as he does. So he is your debate representative of many of your ideas. You learn from him. It's the same thing in every social organization when there are shares and there's voting. If there's no literal monarch, 51% share, with controlling share that can say, I listen to your opinion, but I'm going to do what I want, then it's not private. It's subject to the start of corruption. It's subject to mission creep. So we understand sort of I don't want to
no, I get it. I think this is interesting. So I do want to, when I focus on, I don't consider myself a deep philosophical thinker. And I think the show is geared towards sort of explaining things to people that maybe are truck drivers, welders, that are not deeply read. But there is one thing I want to talk about before we start to talk about how does this play out in day-to-day situations we see now. And that was, you mentioned the idea of utilitarianism. Now, this is a term that I heard a lot in debate. There were these constant debates when I played the game of policy debate in college of deontology versus utilitarianism. So I'm going to explain utilitarianism as simply as I can. It is basically this is a gross oversimplification, but it's basically greatest good for the greatest number. Now, there's all kinds of problems with that statement, because what does greatest good mean? Like, who gets to define good? Like, things like that. But in general, we could go with just that idea. Now, you sort of correctly, I think, criticize leftists using utilitarianism to justify their actions. So, is it okay to punch a Nazi? Yes, because Nazis are bad, and if we didn't punch them, they would do a lot of evil. So the small evil of punching him is good to stop the large evil of Nazis. But you correctly point out, well, it leads to sort of whatever they want then becomes justified. My question to you is, if you had a crystal ball and you could see that they said, actually, us doing this small evil right now through coercion is justified because we could prove it to you through this time machine that you could see that it actually would save lives, would you still be against it? In other words, are you against this idea of coercion for utilitarian purposes merely because it gets exploited, or because it's an evil or it's corrupt on its face?
Yeah, I think that's the core. The magic of their invitation is that they claim to have a crystal ball. Yet if you ask them to demonstrate that crystal ball, you will quickly learn that it's not only doesn't exist, but impossible to exist.
Right.
Like many future predictions. And it's not just like they can probabilistically estimate something, but most of these hypotheticals rely on having this knowledge, while in reality you never get it. They're not realistic. When you debate them, they often say something like, would you steal a penny to save the entire world, the entire universe? And we as ANCAPs would say, no. And then they win the debate, right? So how do we come back from this? What's the problem? Are we crazy? Well, then you ask them, no, let's multiply that penny. Nobody knows what a penny is. If the penny itself is not theft, if you take a penny, you're not stealing anything. What are you actually doing in that action when you steal it? Well, you took a fraction of someone's life away. Our entire conception of property is based on just this body autonomy. Body autonomy is the core. Everything else is sort of an illusion, a metaphor. Labor is a metaphor. Property is a metaphor. You own your time on this planet. It's limited. It has a beginning. It will have an end. And because of that, that's the scarce resource. That's the thing that they're taking away. If they're justified as a normal thing, as a standard, to steal a tiny fraction of it, why can't they steal all of it? Why can't they kill one person to save the entire planet? And if you ask them, would you kill one person to save the entire planet? They'll probably say yes. In fact, there is a trolley cart problem where you kill one person by switching the trolley switch to save just 5. So it's a 1-to-5 ratio. And they would say yes, naturally. The way you have to think about it is not as a single slice of time. You analyze it and you feel good about yourself. Think about it as a system that perpetuates itself. You're going to kill 1 in every 5 people as a rule, as something you find acceptable. We have 8 billion people on the planet. You're willing to murder more than 1 billion of them. You're willing to do that. That's what they're telling you. And that's like a problem.
And they'll tell you that on like, for example, I've debated them on climate change, right? And I'll say, it's like pulling teeth. They won't just say what they mean, or more likely they haven't thought through it. And you'll say, well, we have to completely eliminate fossil fuels by when? They'll say 10 years. And I'll be like, okay, let's take a country like India, right? Where they're just now seeing their life expectancy grow because they're getting a rudimentary energy grid. If we eliminated fossil fuels in the next 10 years, you'll be sentencing millions of them to death. And not only that, we would have to then go to war with places like China that are going to be so let's say that 1 billion people will die. I've had 3 or 4 people, I've said it that way. I said, is it worth it? And they would say yes. And then the last question I ask is, well, how certain are you that we're all dead if we don't get rid of fossil fuels in 10 years? And they'll be like 20%, 30%. And it's like, you just sentenced 1 billion people to death for something that you're 20%. And when you start to think about, well, if you say that trolley cart problem, I'm willing to kill 1 person to save 5. There's problems with that philosophically anyways, but the real problem is the certitude. Because you'll say, I'm certain that it'll save 5 lives. What you're really doing probably is moving that trolley cart, and it wasn't going to kill those 5 people anyways. So now you just murdered someone for no reason. And that's why we shouldn't as humans be equipped to make those sort of decisions, because when you're wrong, you're evil. Like it can't be more evil. So I totally agree.
You can test that intuition very easily in debates. I think if you watch a very strong debater on the Crucible, Synth, debate Scott. Scott spends a lot of time on empirical arguments. He likes to argue over statistics. It entertains him. And then around minute 53 of that debate, he gets asked the penny question. He answers it. He gets laughed at initially by Synth and some parts of the chat. And then he turns it on Synth and says, how many children are you going to obliterate, destroy? And he probably used harsher examples. Right. And you can make it as ugly as possible in order to save the world. And then Synth actually had a little hiccup. Suddenly his moral intuition kicked in and he said, well, listen, if I start murdering so many children, is the world worth saving anymore?
Right.
Have I created such a world? He asked that question live on air. He's like, he said that if I do this, I will not be the type of person that can save the other 5. In fact, I'll be something much worse than the original threat, potentially. So that's the sort of the philosophical risk of this. And then in reality, what you see is that most people are rule consequentialists, rule utilitarians, meaning they do believe in deontological rules. They have no means of discovering them, so they have to invent much more vague stuff than we do. And then they try to sort of inconsistently apply it and say, well, it's justified. The other thing that you should catch immediately is when they say that they deserve things. So a lot of critics of libertarianism recently, Mr. I forgot his first name, Koppelman, released a book, Burning Down the House, where he harshly criticized our type of libertarians, the Hoppians, the Rothbardians, and he narrates the entire history of the movement, and he says that we're a mistake, right? And then during his presentation, he says we deserve things, meaning we deserve healthcare, we deserve our lives being saved in an emergency. We have all of these deserve things, and then you can just extend that analogy. Do you deserve procreating with a woman? And if you do, if that produces children, don't we want the growth of our society? What if we suddenly have massive depopulation that's reaching very low levels? Are you going to say that now the state has to provide, has a lottery where a woman has to sleep with that man because it produces good results, because he deserves to be, perform his primary function as a biological organism? It's a very dangerous, but they always avoid those dangers. They just say deserve. Now, I do want people to have all of those good things. I just believe that that's not how, I deserve you is not a really good statement on a first date, right?
I'll push back a little, but I'll also say where my argument is weakest, right? I do think, like the penny question, I would say, yeah, you would take that penny. But then I would say the problem is a problem of threshold. Because clearly there comes a point where I say, well, that's too much. Well, how do I draw that threshold? I don't have a good answer. I don't. And that's the problem. But go ahead.
There's one legal thing you can do. At least admit, if you understand, learn the theory, and then admit that you're a criminal. And that's a much better position than a rule utilitarian or anyone else or any statist, is to say, you know what, I'll save the penny and save the planet, but I will definitely be a criminal doing it. I will never try to justify it in any sense. And in fact, I'll go to jail, right? To the extent, and in fact, I'll never teach anyone that's how it should be done. If we arrived at such a position, which is implausible, but if we did, there were probably some mistakes along the way that made the criminal solution the only solution. And so that's at least a much better way of thinking about when you're stunned, when you're locked.
It is. It's a difficult problem because, like, I had an argument last night, right, where I said the Democrat position, which is I would think is probably a libertarian position on abortion, is there should be no law. It's between a woman and her doctor, right? And that, to the logical extension, would mean 9-month abortions are okay, right? As long as it's still attached to the woman. Well, maybe you'll disagree, but that's the logical extension of the Democratic argument. It just is. If there is no law and it's only between a woman's body, a woman's choice, that means that they can't then say, oh no, we're against 8-month abortion. You might morally be against it, but you're saying she should still be allowed to do it. And to me, the only logical position of saying woman's body, woman's choice is that you have to say, okay, that means even at 9 months, even at the due date, I'm for abortion. The problem is most people don't look at it like that. But then the problem is it's almost impossible to define. Why do you draw the threshold exactly where you do? That's the problem that I'll run in. That's my greatest weakness when I argue against a complete statist or a complete non-statist, is both of them have me on, at the end of the day, there is some arbitrary measure, and when I decide this is okay and this isn't. And that's absolutely true. It's something that anyone who advocates for any sort of state has to come to grips with. So if you're someone who's libertarian adjacent like me, that's like, I value individual freedom and choice basically above all, but I still think there's a role for limited government, limited taxation. I have to, when I'm talking to someone like you'll always have me on, well, it's easy for me. The answer is right there because you've set forth this framework and say, no, it's not justified. But for me, I have to say, well, here's why the penny's justified, but the $1,000 isn't. And it's difficult. It's very difficult to not be arbitrary in saying that.
You can just say that you can say both of them are unjustified. Not just unjustified. What we're saying is that they're unjustifiable. And again, that's a descriptive statement. We're not prescribing a value to any of these. In fact, the value is still the penny, save the world immediately, right now. That's the value. But you also know you will not be able to logically justify it. that's a separate thing of, I won't go into details how. I just say, read up the literature. I'll reference it if you're very legally inclined. Somebody like Pisco should probably take a look at it. It would be curious to see how it affects his mind. So
It's not
quickly
much
about abortion. I'll give you, and everybody in chat, I'll give you an important tool in order to fight against leftists on identity. So the key question on abortion, and probably in most debates, is identity. What is identity? In the broadest sense. Let's say that you have some analysis in your mind of a situation. You know, a woman becomes pregnant. At some point, a child is there, right? And you have these analytical figures, placeholders. A woman means that's the title, the word, and it points to some concept, right? Now, this pointer points away from the analytics that are all in your head, and it points out towards reality. When it points towards reality, it becomes probabilistic. At that moment, it becomes a probability that what you're pointing at is the real thing. That's identity. The process of identity is taking concepts, connecting them back to reality the best you can, or taking concepts in reality and abstracting them back to your system of logical analysis the best you can. And you have to understand there is some error in that translation, some fuzziness. So how do you go about identifying things? It's a core philosophical problem. It's not trivial. Hasn't been decisively solved, might not ever be solved, but there are common approaches. One approach is probabilistic, and it has a name. It's called the homeostatic property cluster, sometimes homeostatic cluster of definitions. And the actual name explains how it works. Homeostatic means it's based on us, on our general understanding, on our vocabulary. And it is stabilized, static, based on our general understanding of reality. It's not like alien, right? It's based on humans. The cluster part is that it's not a single thing, but it's some cloud of words, of concepts that helps you identify when all of those things or enough of them correlate, you know that's the thing. And then definitions are just definitions or traits. And somebody tells you, name me one trait, name the trait that makes you a human and not a monkey.
Right.
That's a trick question. First of all, it's named the traits. And second of all, the traits will be like a group of them that if you remove one, the others will still allow you to identify a human. Now, if you're a human without an arm, still a human.
Right.
How does that work? You can go to the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, search up the word species, which in philosophy is like identities, is not like just animals, but everything. And read on it. You'll get very technical. New World Encyclopedia has a great link on naturalistic fallacy, the issue with identifying things, including philosophical concepts, including morals. Like morals have to be identified. Becomes a similar problem. How do you identify a moral fact? Because it's in reality, it's going to be fuzzy. So again, back together. How do we use this in a debate? In abortion. How do you identify a human? Well, in front of me, there's a TV monitor. There's a computer monitor.
Right.
I see pixels. I don't see robnoerr. I don't see your chat. What's going on? I make a prediction that based on all the knowledge that I have, with high chance of certitude, I'm talking to a real person. He's passing all the tests. Now, if suddenly there is some interference that's blocking his face, I'm still going to, based on other characteristics, realize I'm still talking with the same person. Whereas when a leftist challenges you on identity, what they're basically saying is as soon as I cover one of my eyes, I'm no longer myself. Well, no. That's the trick that they keep using. So what is human identity? Well, we have biological systems of identity. For example, we can test DNA. As soon as we can test DNA, and it comes back with a result, and it's distinct, that's one way to identify that it's human. If it's inside the mother, and we're scanning for cells and we're seeing a fertilized egg on I don't know on some scanning machine, and we can scan for the DNA or extract some of it and notice that this is like a new cell, why should we say that it doesn't belong to a human? Because it's on a, like, in the current slice of development, it doesn't conform to our usual understanding of what is a human. And so what you should do with identity is also stretch it across time. Meaning, I know that robnoerr is not just like a slice of cells. As soon as I turn off the switch, he will fall apart into atoms. I also know that throughout his life, various cells in his body are going to be replaced. He's a ship of Theseus. The planks are going to be replaced one by one. And I also know that, all life is currently, unfortunately, finite. And at some point, we won't be able to have a coherent conversation even, because our minds are going to be destroyed by time. So we can't judge humanity based on a slice. It has to be the entire continuum. We're capable of identifying that. Why does it break down when we talk about children? In our circles, to come full circle, it doesn't break down. We say as soon as there is conception, it's a human, and now he has competing rights with the woman.
Right.
It's a human organism. Now, that organism is not yet capable of argumentation, not yet capable of reason, and won't be capable of that until they're about age 25, 26, by the way.
Right.
Won't be fully human by that time.
But by the way, just to interrupt, there are people that have advocated for abortion until like speech is development. Like that literally exists. They say we don't qualify it as human until they have speech, because it's uniquely speech that makes human. So not only are you saying something that's true, but there are people that take this to the ridiculous extrapolation that like we should be allowed to abort a 1-year-old.
Yeah, and they always can't answer a question. You know what? What about 1 second before they develop that speech?
Right.
What about 2? Those questions are very nasty for them, because then you suddenly understand that cutoff point is entirely arbitrary. I don't know when you become an adult. I can try to perform a test. We have social conventions that we should keep because we don't have anything better right now. 18 years of age, that's what we decided. Keep it at that until we do a lot more thinking and we know a lot more about, how the brain works. And so...
But I think that what you say there's really smart, and I'm going to take it to a different point, but I'll just say this real quick. The debate has always been, when is it a life? Because it becomes very tricky, right? It's a very clever, like, rhetorical trick to get someone who's more libertarian minded, the phrase, my body, my choice. Because on face value, you agree with that. You're like, I agree. Like, I should have the freedom to do with my body.
2 bodies.
That's the point.
Choices.
So when they say that, what they're conveniently ignoring is, but it's not just your body. Like, for example, it might be my body. I might be stressed out to the point of medical illness because my neighbor. That does not give me the right to eliminate my neighbor and say, well, my body, my choice. It was to make me healthier. Everyone understands, well, that's absurd. Well, it's the same with abortion. You might disagree on when you think it's a life, but the key point is that they can't get away from in this debate. That rhetoric no longer applies. That ideology no longer applies when there's a second life. It doesn't. You don't get the right for a convenience for you to exterminate a life. You don't. And they can't get out of that debate. They try, right? They try to appeal to the liberty-minded person saying, but shouldn't you be allowed to do it? By the way, they don't believe it, because as soon as it comes to forced vaccinations, they're like, sure, not your body, your choice, because you're affecting others.
They can't answer name the trait.
Right.
They can't. They will say, it's like you can watch this live in a debate between Destiny and one of the vegans, the most recent one. I think it was possibly even Vegan Gains, where they're in the channel. They're trying to determine what a human is. And Destiny doesn't have the answer because I don't know why he didn't figure what I figured out by now. Maybe he's not doing research enough. But he does notice the fact that every single trait that the vegan gives him is also arbitrary. He keeps calling him out. Well, listen, what is reason? What is the capacity? What is life? What is like consciousness? All of these are vague terms. You're just like smuggling in the fact that you know them, that they're not arbitrary, but they are sort of arbitrary. You don't have you don't have any proof of where it begins or exactly where it ends. You don't have any measure. So how does it work? One key insight that our sort of the ANCAP society brings in is that, or like the ANCAP academia, is that everyone deserves to have guardianship in order to adjudicate or resolve conflicts in about their rights, right? And so normally, like, I'm my own guardian, Rob is his own guardian, but when there's a child, the child cannot be their own guardian. Everybody agrees they can't think. Well, the fetus also cannot be their own guardian. The guardianship defaults to the mother because she is the first possessor, and I don't think anyone will disagree with that. I think the leftists even actually agree on that. It's not ownership. Think about it more. The good metaphor is money in trust, or body autonomy held in trust. Now, if you hold someone else's property in trust, there's a limit of what you can do with it. You can't just destroy it. If you want to get rid of that guardianship you have, if you are in a society, you should at least announce it. You should say, hey, I'm done. I want someone else to take over. And then somebody in society can volunteer and say, I'm going to take over as a guardian, the father, for example. So as soon as a woman says, I want to evict the baby, everybody on my side will agree she has the right to say it. And then at that moment, she stops being the guardian. She has to announce it to society, and the father or some next of kin, or maybe even somebody right out on the street, can come in and say, I'm going to represent the rights of the fetus as a legal representative. It's very important because they don't do it. So they can, in fact, the court recently deprived the right of that representation from fully born babies, which is shocking to me.
Right.
They're born and they're just allowed to die with nobody. Even if I wanted to come off from the street and say, I'm going to volunteer my money to maintain their life, I'm going to buy the incubator, I'm going to pay for all of the services that are required to save that life, I'm not allowed to do so. That's ridiculous to me.
So there are some audience questions coming in. This isn't a question, but I thought that maybe this would be something in this topic you would be interested. Alone at the Bistro says, if either of you got pregnant, you would be so scared about giving birth and what it would do to your life. And I think this is sort of implying, who are we to say, can you speak a little of that? Because I think that there is, no one's denying that things like this, pregnancy could definitely harm the woman physically, mentally, socially, economically, etc. But why still in that world, we have to look at the other life, that it has agency, that it deserves representation.
I actually want to address their position from a different perspective, slightly different. Okay. Let's introduce a little bit. Let's start noticing things. So I'm pretty sure that 90% of the audience have watched the last season of House of Dragons, of Game of Thrones, heard about it, and that it's about time where I can talk about it without the spoilers being a problem, right? So
yeah, spoiler for House of Dragons. So tune out for a second. I'll give the thumbs up if you turn the audio off when you can come back.
No, I think it's going to be fine. I'm not going to spoil it too much. I'm going to just say generally what certain things that I noticed there. There's many children in the show. There are 3 or 4 pregnancies that are presented in graphic detail. Every time a pregnancy is presented, it is torturous. 2 of the pregnancies result in eventual fatality. Both of them with excruciating pain, one of them to end the pain, the other to try and save the baby. Gory details. I can't associate that because I'm a man. I'm watching I'm disgusted, I'm disturbed, but it will never happen to me. So yes, you're right, I can't understand what you're feeling. But I can empathize with you. If that's what you understand from the media, and you never had birth, and you never had a class or a teacher explain to you how a birth actually feels like, and you don't talk to your grandparents, then you might think that that's indeed just like they're presented to you, that it's always that painful. And it will never occur to you to question, hey, we've been here on the planet for thousands tens of thousands, possibly more years. And birth, the thing that gives us life, is always painful, always slow. Why? Maybe it's actually in rare occurrences it's painful, and you go to the hospital and people take care of you. There's C-sections now, God bless. But
Right.
actually, in the past, for most people, yes, because of infections and other things and weaknesses and diseases, and there was a lot of childhood and mother mortality during birth, but not as much as they show you on the TV set. And that's one show. And if you start going show from show, you start noticing pregnancy and having children is demonized. So how would you feel good about it?
Right.
Would you know how to do it?
To try to give a real world example, so I'm 38. When I had my son, I was 36, my first son, and my wife was 30, I believe. She was in labor for 20 something hours. In my head, if you would have said your wife's going to be in labor for 20 something hours, in my head, that was her screaming at the top of her lungs for 20 something hours. But that's not what it was. She was in pain, no doubt. But there was medical help that was significant. She was able to hold a conversation with me. It wasn't pure torture for 20 hours. And she wouldn't have changed it for the world, right? That amount of pain for that one day, it's the greatest moment in our life. But it really is. As a man, that's my version of it. That's what I know going in. It's going to be the most grotesque thing you've ever seen. It's going to be the most painful, torturous. This will scar this woman for life. That's a gross misrepresentation. That's not to say that terrible things can't happen. But like you said, I mean, one of the statistics that I use all the time when talking about the wonders of capitalism is the fact that I believe today the survival rate for children, babies and their mothers in sub-Saharan Africa during birth is the same as it was in Great Britain in the 1970s. That is an incredible accomplishment when you think of the image you have of sub-Saharan Africa and like, oh, it's this primitive, they don't have access to medical. Literally, their births, the viability of them and the survivability are what it was in what we consider a first world country in the 70s. I mean, I think that's amazing.
We have other things. I'm not an expert here, but I would look at suspicious things like over medication, right?
Yeah.
Like, how much medication do you need for your pain, and what does it cost to your body? I talked to Scott from Fabian Liberty. He has this point where he believes that it actually makes the birth longer. It's less painful, but it takes longer.
Right.
There's a trade-off because you're relaxing the muscles that are supposed to be doing the pushing. There's an issue there. So I'm not an expert. I'm just saying.
Right.
Your question is framed by a worldview where motherhood and also TV shows, it's always a crisis. It's always a dysfunctional family. It's never a functional one. It's never you never feel the pride of having children. And yet, when you look at a society that is disconnected from the TV set, again, I'll go back to the BG Amish community. There's a great interview with them, invited to Amish dinner by Peter Santanello on YouTube. I recommend all of you to watch it. It's just continuous white pill after white pill. It'll make you think, what am I still doing in the city? Or you try to catch a few videos of their women. That's not their mindset. Their mindset is that their average is 5 children per family, right? Again, go to the Hasidic community in Brooklyn, New York. What's their average per family? I think it's between 3 and 4. And yet they don't watch Game of Thrones. They don't. And yet the people who do watch Game of Thrones, they have sometimes less than 1 child per family. They're a declining population, that's why they advocate for immigrants and for control over the schools, because they would disappear in a generation otherwise. Because they've demonized the core value, the core commandment in Christianity: respect the father and the mother, respect yourself as the father and the mother, respect your children as the future fathers and mothers. That's gone. They're demolishing that culturally. Of course you're afraid. You're meant to be afraid. And nothing is being developed. Like, it's not like there is a market demand for alternatives. It exists, but it sort of gets dismissed. There's people with midwives that stay out of the hospital. There's various other inventions that the market might introduce. It just doesn't happen. So, in terms of what to do about it, I just want to close the abortion issue. The way it's actually solved, the compromise that exists, that I believe should happen, is that in your community, in your group of hundreds of people, the law should be something that everybody signs up to. It's a gray area in our understanding of law of how binding it might be. It might be that if you have a lot of money, you can just, abort the child even if it dies. And the only really, we can only put a monetary challenge to it. We can say, if I live here, I agree to pay $10 million if I abort the child. If she has $10 million, sorry, that's what she'll do. And it's up to you, the guardian, to provide a surrogate, artificial womb, medical technology to save that baby. It's just how it's going to be. Another group of libertarian, of ANCAPs, like Walter Block, they believe that you can alienate your rights. They believe you can sell parts of your rights, basically enslave yourself. And so the mother or the surrogate that says, I'm going to do 9 months, signs on that contract, gets notarized, can put her in prison, in a special medical facility for those 9 months, where she doesn't get to accidentally, perform any tricks on the staircase.
Right.
So I don't know which one of those positions is most right. I'm leaning towards the fact that contracts can only be monetary. You can't really alienate yourself. But I think that if you look at, again, societies that have low incidences of abortion, there's plenty of them. Don't require state meddling necessarily. And the state meddles, they're lying. It meddles in both directions. It doesn't allow you to save the baby. It doesn't allow you to sue the woman for murder, for at least in civil court. They're going to laugh you out of the court, even though you've asserted guardianship over the child. It's inconceivable to me, with the current system, how a guardian can harm what they guard. If somebody, you can check it really easily. If somebody crashes a car into that pregnant woman's car, ends up accidentally killing her, it's going to be a double homicide, double manslaughter. Easily. But somehow, if she does it, it's nothing. Consistency is not nice. Consistency is there's going to be some crazy woman out in the forest killing her children. I'm sorry. We can try to hunt her down. Maybe we'll even pay for it and save the child, but we won't save everybody. But the trick is that they're going to scare you away from my position by some, crazy analogy that doesn't actually exist. But yet the system they're promoting is actually the ridiculous one.
Yeah. So, all right. What I want to do is I want to give the audience a chance to ask questions. So if you need a reminder, we're talking to Hoppy and ANCAP, Kasimir. We'll take some audience questions now. There have already been a couple, but please, if you have a question, put it there. Anything within reason. I think Kasimir's game to answer almost anything. So anything that's against terms of service is something we'll leave out. But other than that, I think we're both fair game. One of the questions someone named Goku asked was, can you name a society where this has ever worked?
That's a great question. So what we do in our historical research is we find societies where it partially worked. It worked for large durations. There are YouTubers like Prax Ben that love research. Liquid Zulu also occasionally does research where he shows you the Icelandic Thane system that existed for 100 years. They show you certain colonies in the New World that were very anarchic in the way they were founded. And there's the Amish example that I keep referencing, where just by virtue of being, they don't know our rules. They're simply pacifist. Now, I'm not a pacifist. If you attack me, I'll do quite a bit back, right? I might even do it where you believe that it's preemption. Right? We can talk about this, but I believe that you are aggressing, and I'll be justified in preempting, stopping you. I don't need to wait for you to shoot first in a gunfight. You're going to draw, I have to draw faster.
Right.
So we have these examples that are partial examples. We also have examples within a state of people organizing voluntarily. We have examples within the state of particular problems like the roads or the police or the fire department solved in a private manner. Did they ever all exist within one system that was perfectly legal based on our rules, perfectly adhering to non-aggression principle and argumentation ethics? Not yet. One of the problems why is because the best version of our theory only emerged in 2016. It was written in 93. It faced very harsh criticism, very thorough. Multiple articles were like, no, this is nonsense. Dismiss, dismiss, dismiss. And then for tens of years, a lot of people worked to debunk one by one every counter argument till it became more and more ridiculous and easy to just dismiss out of hand. And in 2016, there is a lecture by Hans Hermann Hoppe where he lays out everything in way too much detail for most of you guys to want to engage with them. Sorry. And now it's our job to popularize it. It just happened. We're gonna, if we're optimistic, it's going to hit mainstream culture in 50 years and become reality in 100.
Well, on this note, there's another question I think that goes right into this. Fun12 wants to know, what book do you think you would get the most value from? Or maybe to refine the question, if someone's interested, what book would you recommend? Where do you think people should start?
I think there is a... so the first guy that invented the term, perhaps not the best term to name us anarcho-capitalist, meaning anarchists and capitalists, was Murray Rothbard. The reason why he wanted to do that is because he's correct. There's anarchist rules there, and it's a bit anti-egalitarian, so it's not liberalism. It's not liberal, really. It emerges out of it, but it's like a counter movement, almost a reaction to it. And so he invented that term. His book is called, it's a pamphlet, it's called Anatomy of the State. Anatomy of the State does not provide solutions, but it does address common misconceptions, and it tries to defeat common counter-arguments, common copes. It's the anti-cope book. If you want to stop coping about the state and think about it seriously, at least recognize what it is, read that pamphlet. Obviously, you'll have disagreements with it, but I think it's a good place to start. The other good place to start is Hans Hermann Hoppe's Democracy, the God That Failed. That book will probably turn you a little bit more reactionary. You should read reactionary literature as well. Read a little bit of Carlyle. Currently, there's Courtesy Arvin. You can read his criticism. He also criticizes the current state, and he has proposals that differ from ours. Mrs.org is the website. It has way too many books and articles. You start searching a topic, you will find debates on abortion, debates on any topic you want. It's up to you to determine who is right in the debates, unfortunately. And there's popularizers. But in terms of books, I would start with Anatomy, the God That Failed, Anatomy of the State, Democracy, the God That Failed. There are other books by Hans Hermann Hoppe that are interesting, like Getting Libertarianism Right, like What Must Be Done, chapters out of them. You can grab a chapter in his book from 1993, Economy and Society. I forget the full name. You can grab a chapter on, for example, production of defense, where he handles what's that all about, where he handles public goods. There's a lot, right? So that's where you start.
Yeah. Someone asked, I forget who asked this, but they asked earlier, what do you think of Ayn Rand and objectivism?
Okay. We are in a sort of mortal combat with objectivists very often. When Jan Brooks comes to our channel, to Scott's channel to debate him, he would say, libertarians must be eliminated as an ideology, must be destroyed. So I don't think that animosity has to be there. A lot of people, so they have a moral system. They believe that they have a moral realist, or at least approaching that moral system. They have prescriptions that are based on life and flourishing. And I find them perfectly acceptable because, again, my system is value neutral. I disagree with them when they say that, this state thing, this coercion, they're the guys that will steal the penny, for sure, right? So on that, we disagree. I disagree with their analysis of the state. I think they should read more reactionaries. That Ayn Rand is a bit too optimistic, in parts. But I also think that if you, I can't really comment about it because it's still on my reading list. I don't think they'll ever convince me out of ANCAP, but maybe they'll convince me that their moral system is sufficient where I won't need, any religious one instead. They're very anti-religious. My current understanding is that because I don't have the time to invent a new religion that will be fully consistent with my views, I will have to use a moral system that I was raised in, which is Christianity and Judaism. I would have to look at the 10 Commandments and say, those are pretty good. I'll grab that. Right? Which is not perfect. It has issues. But so I'm not against objectivism. I think the fight is sort of frivolous. They have a fight with the wrong types of libertarians, and I understand them. Just like Rob here will say, I'm a libertarian, but not like these crazy guys. Objectivists want to eliminate the crazy guys, and we want to eliminate the crazy guys. We want to have a different label from them.
Right.
That's
and that's one of the things that's always confusing interacting with people. Labels are very difficult. Like, human nature is that we need to label things. You sort of hit on this earlier, right? Like, there's this idea, like, I don't care how smart you are. If someone comes up to you and says, define man, you'd be like, oh, well, the sexual organs of a male, right? Like an adult, you'd be able to say, and they'd be like, but what about this? Here's a person that's slightly outside of it. And they'd always be able to take the exception. And it makes it, you can do that with anything. Define chair, define dog, right? And it's very difficult and probably impossible to get a complete, just if there was an alien that didn't know what these things were.
Proven impossible, even better. Maybe somebody will disagree with Moore's proof, the color yellow, all of that naturalistic fallacy. It's a naturalistic fallacy to claim that the identity is exactly what you're observing.
Yeah. So it's like that with all sorts of things, right? There's I don't want to say silly. There are things that are clearly being used
also,
for. Okay.
Sorry to interrupt.
No.
The key thing is that they were all invaded. I'll declare myself an ANCAP. In 50 years, there's going to be a leftist in my organization trying to undermine me, trying to subvert it, trying to shift it to the left, because it's going to be a social organization. To a great extent, there's always going to be a leftward flow in it, to some extent. Libertarianism was absolutely conquered by light Democrats through the history of the United States.
Yeah,
the
and so
revolution countered that a little bit.
Right, and so it's difficult, right, when you're on these spaces where you're going to debate a libertarian or these people. Well, what does that? It runs a huge gambit. One of the things I have a constant source of frustration. I'll admit sometimes hyperbolically, but it's also authentically. That's how humans talk. Like, humans will say shit like, I'll never fucking eat at that place again. Really? Never? Right? You would never eat? Right? That's how we talk. That's natural. People understand that sort of community. So when I say the Democrats believe X, inevitably I'll get 3 morons in my chat going, I'm a Democrat and I don't believe X. It's like, right. Well, I was talking about their leadership, the majority of the party, the people with power, et cetera, et cetera. So these labels they're necessary, but they're also sometimes clunky. That's why I think it was really important to talk to you about these things. Something that I find helps give people an idea of exactly the type of things you're doing is to apply it to a real world situation. So EOD696 asks, who do you think should lead the Libertarian Party in 2024? And I think that will give people an idea of where you're coming from.
I think for now, because none of the academics will want that mantle at all, it has to be Dave Smith. And it's because he has a sufficient understanding, and I've watched him in various debates. He's generally on the right side, at least when he's talking about the United States. I disagree with him a little bit on some issues on foreign policy. I think he's a bit loose there. The people he listens to about foreign policy are, I think, being a bit inaccurate in the facts that they present. So there's issues there, but he gets it. He gets the actual compromise that happened with Ron Paul. Somebody is asking in chat, are there any good libertarians in Congress? There are Thomas Massey, is great. Anyone who's fiscally conservative is likely going to have a reading list where they know about Murray Rothbard for sure and have read them, and have read Hans Hermann Hoppe as well. They are in a compromised situation by being in government. They're trying to shift the system to without killing anyone, which is already a compromise. There's a meme in our community where robnoerr, if you have a button to destroy the deep state, including the entire U.S. government, and the button is right in front of you, are you going to press it?
It's tough, right?
With all the consequences that, the
Right.
mass death that will occur right after, as things stabilize. And as another state emerges naturally, because we haven't, because even people that heard of our ideology as not a meme are a tiny minority. So obviously, I don't want to press that button, but ideologically, I'm compelled to. I'm compelled to answer yes, but it's a tragic yes. And I'm trying desperately to make it not tragic, partly by appearing in front of people, sending them in a good direction, supporting people politically that I can, even though I'm stealing the penny as I'm doing so in some way. So
it's a conundrum, right? Because it goes back to that idea, and it's, by the way, there's a little bit of horseshoe theory from some left-wing perspectives that are like postmodernists that I've heard. When I was in the debate community, there were a lot of postmodernists that were this sort of, capitalism is unforgivable, the state is unforgivable, so we need to basically retreat into our drum circle. And, the counter to that is, but if you do that, you have no mechanism to how to stop the state when it comes for you. And so the idea of taking the penny I find very interesting, which is, given that we live in a world that very likely could criminalize your ability to speak on these issues, this is a possibility in the next decade, that you could literally be criminally charged for saying the sort of things that you're saying here tonight. Do you advocate for a compromise now? We take the penny now to say, well, we get someone pushing back in government from the right to say we will actively punish those that seek to punish ours. Do you find that preemptive, or do you say that no, that fits into the stealing the penny ideology that you think is criminal?
Listen, there's a lot of leeway when you're under the gun. In fact, if somebody points a gun at you and says, pick up the gun, you pick up the gun. Shoot that man, you can shoot that man. Like, morally, you might say, no, I'd rather get killed than shoot a man. It's your moral choice. But you're not the tool that could cause the death. The tool that caused death is the gun aiming at your head. He's the one responsible. He has you enslaved. And so, as a hostage, you have to do the best you can to escape, to fight, to get better treatment. You can vote on all of those, as long as your vote is sort of a hostage vote, and you don't increase the coercion.
What do
That's
you
where
say?
the compromise.
What do you say to left-wingers that say, right, and the system is systemically racist, so we're justified in preemptively using violence to stop this system that will commit genocide against the LGBT or will, systemically abuse natives and people of color?
They twist every single definition. Every single definition. You can tell the ocean as you're drowning that you have a right to live. No. Your life exists because you're in a cooperative society. In fact, let's roll all the way back to the original point. You don't talk about Africa when you talk about removing oil from the planet, like stop using oil. A good third of the population of the planet consumes food that is grown using nitrates that are produced from fossil fuels, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Or
right.
that involve fossil fuels in their manufacturing. That's more than they're willing to admit. That's how much technology advanced the human race, right? So that's sorry, I sort of lost my point.
Well, no, I think what you're saying here is that the idea that they could say, well, there is this, on this case, it would be like climate change or something like that, would be, we morally, to save everyone, we have to do X, we have to preemptively strike out, right? But what you're saying is, well, with the nitrate usage, you're sentencing huge amounts of people to starvation, That's
And
that's
also
the
they're not serious. Like this goes into empirics. When somebody has loose legal system in their mind, their empirics are often shaky. If you start testing the empirics, you'll often find, not always, but often you'll find that they're lying to you. So about the climate change, I'm willing to concede everything, including that it's anthropogenic for the sake of argument. I'm not sure about that last part, meaning human caused.
right.
But let's think empirically, which countries pollute the least in CO2 and pollution in general around the planet that are developed? Because everybody deserves, quote unquote, to be developed. Ontario, Canada, France, top of the list, along with some Scandinavian countries. What unites all of them? Nuclear energy on a high scale, encompassing 60% plus of their economy. So we have a solution now. Who's serious about that solution? Is the United States serious?
No.
We're at 20%. It's almost illegal to develop here. The laws, if you start reading them, you're like, who wrote this nonsense? That's not even about safety. We have situations in the United States where we build a nuclear power plant, we build it, it's complete, and then somebody in the government says, well, I received some donor money from the coal industry, so I have the right to cancel the licensing for this entire project. And now it rots away. Nobody's even allowed to purchase it. Now, imagine the insurance costs of the next project after such a failure. And why it costs, like, because of that insurance cost, it now costs, the costs are like triple. And the approval period is longer than the construction. And the risks keep increasing because the longer everything, the more governments get replaced. No investor wants that much risk. So we're not doing it. And a bunch of empiricists can write detailed articles about how nuclear energy in the United States is actually more expensive than solar. You made it more expensive than solar.
Right.
Even though...
Okay. I was going to say...
One more piece of empiricism, there are only 2 studies that examine the danger of nuclear power. 1, deaths per kilowatt hour. So how many people die in each technology. Nuclear power is at the bottom, competing with solar. People falling off the roof as they install solar plant.
Right.
And people in the mines in Africa. Right? Those are the components. And then it sharply increases into coal that just kills millions of people worldwide. A Holocaust every single year, and nobody bats an eye. Nobody cares. And then everything else is like it's a graph that looks like a hyperbole into deaths. By natural gas is a bit better, and then oil is worse, and coal is horrendous. Coal causes death by spreading, including one of the causes of death is it spreads radioactive tiny components that get into your lungs and cause cancer. That's one of the perceived mechanisms of it. So they're lying about that. And then another group of scientists, only 2 studies, another group of scientists, I believe in 2013, around that, after Fukushima, they decided to examine how many lives were killed by nuclear power globally. But they decided to just take the data and produce a result. The result was negative. What? Nuclear energy killed negative lives? Yes, negative 2 million something. Nuclear energy in human history has saved lives. So when you're closing that power plant, Mr. Utilitarian, you're killing people, empirically.
Yeah, and we see this, right? We see it right now in Germany, right? That was the model. They got rid of nuclear, right? It was, we're going to these new green. Now they're desperate. Like, and people don't understand this. I think you mentioned this earlier when you were talking about problems that starvation solved. We have these great left-wing ideologues because we're so comfortable. That's why we have them. And I'm less comfortable where I live than many of these people that I'm debating. But I'm still very comfortable, very, very comfortable. But I know people that when gas goes to $5 a gallon, they lose their home, right? They had to pick up a second job, which means less time spending time with their family, which means more reliance on the state to educate their children, to go to childcare, et cetera, et cetera. These things matter. Like, they don't show up on a calculation of a sheet of deaths, right? But these sorts of, I have to work 90 hours a week now because energy costs have gone up or because of inflation, that matters. It takes a toll on you. And when I hear people flippantly talk about this stuff, oh, well, who was it? Stephen Colbert said, I'd happily pay $15 a gallon. Of course you would, right? Because the percentage of your value, of your worth, that $15 an hour that you'll have to buy gas, that's almost nothing. But to me and my family, $15 a gallon puts me on the street. Like, literally, I'm homeless. That's what would happen.
There's this right-wing meme on the very extremist boards where they show this future civilization of humanity in space, and then they show some, something else, something degenerate from the culture war, and say, we gave up all of this for that.
Yeah.
Now, if you don't understand the mechanism of giving up, that's where it resides. In energy cost. Peak Prosperity is I'll shout them out, great YouTube channel. That's his main sort of argument. He says, energy production is at the source of everything in our life. Everything is energy. So if we could overproduce energy and it becomes like as cheap as possible, and we can distribute it as cheaply as possible, that actually creates a potential for things that we currently consider overpriced. It's incredible the possibilities that we have, including if you're a leftist or like the environmentalist and you want to save the planet. Let's remove carbon straight from the atmosphere. Let's do that. Well, we can't do that if at our current energy costs, but we could do it if energy was, 1,000 times cheaper.
And it's something. And when I debated, it was very weird. My debate partner was this Buddhist left-wing vegan, like tall beanpole. We're quite the crew, We debated. The argument we debated almost every debate was something called business confidence. And we would be able, whatever plan you had, we could argue that shook the confidence of business, which would lead to an economic downturn, and that would cause a conflict, a war or something. But more importantly than that, how do you evaluate a war versus racism? How do you evaluate a war versus environmentalism or sexism, right? Or bigotry? And what we could argue, and the literature is quite clear on this, and anecdotally it makes sense, as people suffer economically, those things get worse. If you are a country going into depression because your energy costs are going up, what do you think a country like Brazil would do in that case? The very first thing they're going to do is look at natural resources and say, how can we exploit them more to make our people survive? They're going to cut into the forest. They're going to use cheap energy, like cheap, dirty coal. All because, and that's the problem they're seeing in Germany, because Greta Thunberg told them that nuclear power was bad. Now they're resorting to actually importing, right, which is causing CO2 emissions to increase, right? So the very people that told you that they had to limit, the types of energy like nuclear energy in the name of saving the environment, not only is it coercion, not only is it costing people economically and physically, but it's also making the very problem they claim to solve worse. So and that's, one of the things I work in home health care. With people with developmental disabilities. We can talk till we're blue in the face about fraud and about how the government, as you have government take money from people, it siphons it to the people that they have interest to. But what about just ineptitude, right? Like, I'll give you a brief story that explains government spending to an average person. I work in home health care for people with disabilities, and the state funds our company in some manner. There's also other funding, but just for the sake of this, the state funds, right? One person I worked with desperately wanted a basketball, but they did not have money. So I put in a request for $10 to buy a basketball. They said they could not do that. They could not send that because that would become a personal possession of his. Therefore, the state could not send the funds for that. He had to come up with the funds himself to buy this $10 basketball. Now, I'm going to admit something that it's actually illegal that I did. I bought him the basketball with my money. I'm not allowed to do that, but I was like, I had a coupon. It was free. And bought him the $10 basketball. But you know what they told me they would do? They would charter a boat for us to go to Lake Erie to fish for a 3-day weekend, which would have cost about $1,400 to send him and me to charter that boat, because that was an experience and not something that would be a possession. Now, that sort of explain. There are people that we take care of that are in these beautiful 5-bedroom homes that are a person living by themselves, but the state will pay for that. And it's because it's not their money. It's free money to them. They'll just take more from you. You would never do that. I would never do that. We're not going to frivolously spend ourselves into bankruptcy because it's like, well, I can only afford a 2-bedroom house, but I bought a 10-bedroom one just because. But that's the sort of things when the state is spending, they don't have your best interest at heart, and they don't look at the value that what went into that money, right? That your work, that every single person that contributed through taxes, that's part of their body. They don't care. It's like, and I'll leave you riff on this, but it's like, I learned when I was like 13 or 14, my mom used to yell at me because you'd open a can of pop and like drink half it and leave it sit there. And my mom would be like, what the hell are you doing? Pop's expensive. Don't open half of it and then throw it away. And you're like, yeah, whatever. Until you move out on your own and you realize like, oh shit, mom was right. Like this stuff's expensive. All of a sudden you become so much more financially responsible because when you're paying for it, when you're having to work and pay for it, you understand what it means to spend like that. The government never will. And that's how I was reading the other day, maybe you have more specific numbers on this, but the debt or the interest on our debt is soon to outpace national defense spending a year. That's insane. Like that's you can't continue that.
That's hidden actually. So right now we're at like what 30 trillion, I believe, if I'm mistaken, maybe a bit more. Now, actually, some researchers are doing work, and they, researchers love big number headlines. So when you try to look for it, like how much do we actually owe with all the obligations? Look for the word obligations by the U.S. government. The real number is 100 trillion. No, it's 200 trillion. No one actually knows. It's like estimates. So that's when if at one point we have to pay all of it back. Now, the good news is that if our economy keeps growing, people calculate that if we take a spending pause of 3 years, no budget expansion for 3 years, and then we work for like 10 years with only mild increases, then our GDP increase of 2 to 3 to 4% per year is sufficient to basically eliminate the national debt as it was when it was calculated. Maybe the current figure is triple that, but it's still within the lifetime of a human being. We can theoretically still pay it off. I think the main issue with this theft is also what they wasted on.
Right.
Like, did we spend those 30 trillion on having like the infrastructure, the internet, the nuclear power plants that we could have had? No, they're gone. And the system of how they spend that money, that's where you understand what the problem is with any collective action, with non-private decision making when it's not your money being spent. Is that okay? Here's an example from my city right now. Hochul just got elected by a smaller margin than was expected of our state, New York State. And so I just learned yesterday that she announced a plan. $150 million from the state budget are going to be used on art projects. Okay, we have a lot of tourism. We have a lot of creative people, artistic programs. Possibly not the worst way a government can spend money. Right? No, it's not a foreign war. But what is actually happening? Well, if you want to receive that money, you will have to go through an organization. You'd have to go through some nonprofit. Somebody works at that nonprofit. Somebody who donates to a political party. Maybe the big share of that money will go to a big organization. And maybe that organization is somehow related to our governor. Maybe she has friends working there. Maybe their children are working there. Like, that's a wild hypothesis. Especially, you can pay attention to this is when they do gender studies in Afghanistan. That's my recent joke. Like, you think gender studies in Afghanistan, what are they on? It actually makes perfect sense for them to propose that. Why? Well, think about it. Who's going to do gender studies in Afghanistan? There's no gender studies program there right now. No trained gender studies experts. So you have to import them. You have to train them in the United States. You have to create infrastructure for that. You have to pay for all of that. And who's going to do that? Well, their people. their supporters, their organizers, their party. That's how it's done. Always.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Everything.
One of the things that I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about, I think whether you be small government or complete libertarian, to me, the constant debate that I've been in with sort of the big government lefties is sort of the idea of wealth inequality. And, you know, they'll talk about, you know, corporate influence on government. My solution's always been corporate influence on government exists because government has the ability to basically pick winners and losers. So if you take away the incentive, who cares if Microsoft's donating $10 million to the government if the government's toothless and they can't do anything? The reason they donate is because they know they could pass policies that benefit me and hurt my opponent. So I say smaller government's my answer. But the debate, as far as I'm concerned, is over, and we'll see if you agree with me, because we had two large statist solutions, which were lockdowns and were the massive printing of money in these bills. And it is beyond debate that the net result of those two things combined was a large siphoning of wealth from the poor and working class to the upper class. That's what's happened these past 2 years. Both the results of large statist policies. I don't know how the left argues out of this. Their solution's always, well, you need to give us more power. Right? If the problem was you didn't give us enough. But that's clearly, like, do you see it the same way that this is in practice? Like, let's take it out of the philosophical academic level. In practice, we see the result of mass government saying you need to do this for your health. They were wrong. And then saying, oh, our bad. Now we need to do this with your money and trillions of dollars. And the poor and working class, the same people they claim, the left claims to care about the most, are suffering the most.
I should say that even though I voted for Trump twice, and I will vote for him probably a third time because I understand politics a bit better than some of my friends. I think that it was a clear mistake when he wrote that thing about Sweden. And Sweden actually proved that in the total sum, after several years, they actually do have the lowest mortality rate because they allowed people to lock down as much as they wanted to, which some people did, some didn't, and it balanced itself out. They had the right approach. Proven, empirically done. So yes, they will ignore empirics where they want to. They'll just ignore it. It didn't happen. It will be like the totally peaceful protests. You know, flames behind you, and the dog is sitting there on CNN and says, not the dog, the person, but like in that meme, is like, this is fine. This is, my hand is melting. This is fine. That's the meme, the joke. He's a great reporter, by the way. He's just a horrible network. He was on location, at least, right? He actually showed us what happened. So,
right. I agree.
No
that's something that I think it's important to say. It's not that these terrible networks, like, they are terrible, they're propagandists. That doesn't mean everyone involved is a horrible person. Like, some people, like, it's a trap. I don't mean to get too in the weeds here, but it's a trap. Like, people will say this, well, CNN said it must not be true. No, that's not true. Oftentimes what CNN says is true. It's their interpretation of what that means, right? So they might say GDP rose 1.2%. They massage those numbers, the government, but CNN's reporting the accurate number that the government gave them, right? I'm not going to be like, I don't believe that number. I don't believe it because CNN. Now, when they go on to say, oh, the reason the number was so low was because Trump, that's where the bullshit is, right? But the actual, and I think so many people in our world make that mistake where they're like, I refuse to look at anything that, or a reporter that works at CNN. Well, there are reporters that work at CNN that are going into war zones, right? Or they're going into riots. And they're not putting the graphic down there. Like, they're basically saying to some extent what they're told they have to say. But I still respect that. I respect the people, even that work at networks I disagree, that put themselves in danger because where would we be had he not been there? We wouldn't have seen it.
Pressure that guy to quit and join another network. But I understand he has to make bread. I'll yell at him. It's fake news.
Yeah. So another question that we had, several people asked, Slippery and Aftershock asked, was you sort of mentioned how you were debating sort of the ANCAP type people and libertarian type people, and then you eventually became Hoppy and ANCAP. Can you explain what led to that change and like how long ago that change was?
It was a couple of years by now. And it was because I greatly respect logic, and I always sensed that classical liberalism had logical contradictions inside of it. I could not reconcile them. And I could not turn into a utilitarian at all. I could definitely not turn into a socialist. In terms of economics, you just understand that you eventually reach something approaching Austrian economics if you start reading into them. And then you start noticing history. I really like historical references. When I get a historical reference, for example, or maybe current events, like if I find out that a lot of the highways in France are toll roads that are privately owned, turnpike roads right now, and they operate just fine, that's something I didn't learn in high school. I thought all roads have to be by Big Daddy government. So that influenced me because it started knocking away all the copes, and also reading reactionaries, their criticism of the state, and then being on Discord servers with lots of smart individuals who kept pushing me, and I pushed back, and then they said, well, read this, or read that, and eventually they brought me to this understanding that even though it's uncomfortable, some of my moral intuitions are against the conclusions, it doesn't mean that I'm if your friend is trying to commit suicide, like Jim Bob asked me, would you stop him? Yes, I would. I would presume that he's not of sound mind, that he's not a moral agent, and that I should stop him, and I will wager on that, and my intention is good, and I'm not committing a crime, even though I'm hijacking and kidnapping the person, right? But we would differ in that if that person proved to me that they're a moral agent and proved to me that that's their intent, and argument is done, I couldn't convince them otherwise, I have to let them go. Not going to enslave them to save them. I think that's what brought me around to it. It's the understanding of that core concept. It's that I don't get what I want. I want you to have a good life, but if you want to become a drug addict, I'll pay donations to the center that will try to bring you out. I'll hire you and try to give you a good job so that you get rid of all of that nonsense. I'll spread good information through the media to get you out of it. I won't enslave you for it because it defeats the whole purpose of what I'm doing. Also, worse, it opens up a market for enslavement. It opens up a market that produces all the academics that confuse everybody's mind. That's also a market.
So let's see what you think of this. Maybe this is something you could use. Because of what I do with home health care with people with developmental disabilities, there are all sorts of state regulations that we have to follow. And the state comes through and makes sure that we're following these regulations. My company is considered a non-restrictive company. So in some companies, you could be trained to have holds, right? To restrict people if they're self-harming and things like that. My company's not that. But there are all sorts of things that are considered restrictive that maybe the average person wouldn't think of. So let me give you a real situation that happens. Let's say I'm taking care of someone who's autistic, but it's diabetic. And let's say they reach into the refrigerator and they pull out a gallon of ice cream and they start eating the whole ice cream. Now, I know that that's bad for them. And I know they don't really have the capability to understand why that's bad, but I'm still legally bound from taking it from them, right? There are things that we could do within the mechanisms. We could say, okay, we need to write within our support plan and then get it checked by the government that says that we're not allowed to have sugary treats in the house like ice cream. Now, the idea of the state being in control of this is not really the point I want to focus on. But the idea of what happens is once you say the state's not there, and I just say, yeah, I'll take that ice cream for you. And then I'll take that pack of cigarettes from you. And then you're not allowed to drink that beer. What happens is in almost every example I've seen in companies where people thought, I know what's best for them, it always is taken to a terrible extreme that ends up harming that person, right? So in the name of, I had to stop that person from lighting up that cigarette because I know about the dangers of cigarettes and they don't. Even with people that we consider with developmental disabilities, I find it 99% of the time to be morally reprehensible because what happens is you take their agency from them and then you become the person all of a sudden their life's not about what they want, it's about what you want. And it's terrible to say, but it might be. Yeah, they die 10 years sooner than they would have because they chose to smoke a pack of cigarettes a day. But that's not my place. My place is to say this is a bad idea, here are the health risks, but I shouldn't be allowed to say I have determined you're not allowed to make this choice, even with people with disability. It's different with children, obviously, and it could be different if someone is so disabled that they can't. But most of the people I'm talking about can communicate, right? I always found that it kind of, I always thought that somehow proves a lot of libertarian principles where it's like you have the freedom to make bad choices for yourself, and it's tyrannical to say no. An outside actor says you do not have that right.
So first of all, I'm not like a lawyer. So a lot of, like, if chat has some complex question, I'll answer to the best of my ability. But really, a lot of the time, that's what you have to answer. I'm not a lawyer, and I can describe to you how the market will likely solve this and what are the principles. The principle is that Rob is not the guardian of that person. The principle is that somebody has partial guardianship on that person based on the extent of their ability to control themselves. And that has to be assigned by a court, and we should have at least parallel courts. If you want to have a state court, fine, but it should be also a private institution that can review and come up with its own judgment. It's a complicated question of how that's set up, but if we ignore that just for now, right, the optimal situation should be that there should be a contest between the guardian and the institution and the insurance agency that provides coverage for all of this behavior on what is reasonable. They should come up to a standard, and that they should be closer to the actual case than somebody in Washington, most likely. And there should be a choice. If the person that's institutionalized has the right to reject the current treatment they're receiving to that extent, then he can relocate from your institution. And as you said, there is a choice, right? I think that it borders on abuse to allow somebody who is not fully in their right mind to eat foods that will immediately cause a shock and kill them. That borders on abuse. But the solution to this is not me telling you who's right or wrong. I can't. I can give you the principles that I would expect to be used in court. The principle is determining who has guardianship over that particular decision. Can the person make it? Determining the extent of the harm of it. Like, I would argue that there's no proof that cigarettes will cause their immediate death. And so if they want to commit the slow suicide of smoking cigarettes, I wouldn't advocate for it, but go ahead, man. Same thing with cigars and other damaging stuff.
Yeah.
It's a negotiation. First principles have to be used, though. It's good to have first principles so that we don't end up with this oscillating between two crazy extremes of institutions abusing people, which is what we had, 70 years ago, and the current extreme of almost no institutions, period.
Right.
And right now, if you have a relative that is mildly incapacitated and you want to get them examined by a doctor, the only option you have on the market is shock therapy, meaning a bunch of strong men barge into your house, traumatically seize that person, inject them with
Kanye. We're talking Kanye stuff. Right?
Kanye stuff, yeah. It's
right.
going to be Kanye stuff. And then the way the doctors describe it, it's like therapy where they destroy the person's identity immediately and then slowly try to rebuild it. Sounds crazy to me, and that's the only approach in the market. So to me, that's a crazy oscillation. That's not there's varying. I could talk, I happen to know a little because I'm in the field about sort of some of the treatments of the particular people I have. But I got two more questions for you before I get out. First, Aftershock wants to know 2024 prediction. I assume he means national parties and president. Who do you think, if you had to guess right now? I'm going to shill my Twitter a little bit. Free Kasimir, because I didn't understand how to register. Kasimir Freeman. Free Kasimir, whatever. I have a tweet there It's somewhat masked because I didn't want to use names, but I wrote that all of those negative qualities that people find in Trump, let's list them: the narcissism, the delusions of grandeur, partly justified, partly not, the viciousness towards enemies that slight him, the vengefulness, the rudeness, the directness, all of those negative qualities, the tenacity in pursuing negative feelings. All of that is ugly to you, and you might be a viewer that thinks DeSantis is a much prettier man, speaks better, and could potentially win in 2024 over senile Biden or anyone else in the Democratic Party. You might be right. Here's the problem: the quality required to actually have a semblance of a chance of defeating the system is somebody like Trump. Is somebody who's a billionaire who's willing to become a millionaire. Is somebody who's willing to say, I did my children, if they're trying, like, my children will handle their own security. Because your children are going to be a target if you're trying to take out alphabet agencies. So when Trump comes out and says to the whole world, 50,000 jobs minimum from the federal government are going to be gone, and all the rest, I'm going to make sure they're political appointments, down to the very, very low levels, so that every administration comes in can just replace half of the deep state. To me, that's a win. Can you do it without getting JFK? I don't know. But I am pretty sure that pretty boy DeSantis won't do it because he doesn't have billions of dollars. He's a civil servant for most of his life, I believe, right? Political life.
Military
military than that. And as much as I like him as a person, I just know that the system can easily crush him. No chance. So should you go for some chance or no chance?
Well, there's, another thing to consider is it sounds like elementary, but before you build something up, you need to demolish what's there. And we have this sort of deep state that needs to be demolished. Are we at the building stage or are we at the demolition stage? And if you're like me and you think the demolition stage, who do you think's more of a demolisher, Trump or DeSantis? And I think it's pretty clear. Now, that's not to say that I wouldn't vote for DeSantis or that I don't, that a lot could change in 2 years. But I think you're right that, my big concern with DeSantis is my prediction after the election was that the Republican establishment's going to be like, well, you see, the problem was Trumpism. We need to get back to Jeb Bush conservatism. We need to get back to Paul Ryan conservatism. And those are the people that are going to be whispering in DeSantis' ear for 2 years. Oh, you got a chance to win, but you got to be less like Trump. No more sending people to Martha's Vineyard. It's time to be presidential. It's time to cooperate with the other side. And at that point, if that's what it becomes, I'm not interested in someone that will do 1%, 2%, 3% good, but basically give in and keep the establishment going apace. I would rather take the guy that annoys the shit out of me that has less of a chance of winning, but at least if he gets in there, might do something. Now, having said that, if Trump wins, he mucked it up the first time, so there's a significant chance he could muck it up again. But
that's where I think that's the argument. That's the argument that's coming from my camp, and just I can't. I have struggled hiding my disdain. Even Dave Smith is like that. He spent half last week mocking Trump and saying Trump is. Yeah, we know that everybody in politics right now is a criminal, and Trump says criminal things carelessly that are absolutely not based on any system. Like he would say, "Oh, let's kill all the drug dealers." Oh, right. No, he means the cartels. It's always ambiguous. It's like Duarte speech. Nonsense. But again, you're not getting perfection. Just forget about it. You're a dissident. You're oppressed. You can do things about it, and you have, there's I love this analogy, the 4 boxes of liberty. Right? Let's name those boxes. There's the ballot box. There's the soap box, which is this. There is the jury box, which is where never resist a stint in the jury. Always try to hide your power level. Get into the juries. I won't totally tell you why, but let's say you have a lot of power as a jury member, more than anyone else. And then there's the bullet, the ammo box. Now, we can't talk about the ammo box for legal reasons. It's not our job. If you like that box, go practice, and then have a hard think. That's it, right? Um, that's a separate venue. We're dealing with all the rest. We should do the best we can. The strategy for dissidents, for the right, for people that have moral values, is to have all of the above and to unite as much as possible. All of the above, and always bet on what can do either the most damage or the most help.
Yeah, and sometimes that means strange bedfellows, right? Like I'll give you an example. And I just want to be clear, when we're talking about ammo bucks, we're talking purely self-defense and things like that, right? And there could conceivably come a time which nowhere is near where tyranny could, we have a Stalin-esque tyranny. That's not what we're talking. Just want to be clear on that. But, when there was this gun, it seems like a lifetime ago. In Virginia, there was this pro-gun rally. And I had some friends that went there and they were streaming and I called in. And one of the things they said was, there is some sort of radical black nationalist here, and they're marching with us about the importance of self-defense. I said, good. You should take those. If that is an issue that you think is sort of a prima facie issue, you absolutely should take allies that you massively disagree with on other things. You absolutely should. That might mean that people that I don't particularly care for their ideology, like Jimmy Dore, that I would say, well, Jimmy's making some very persuasive points on the corruption of the FBI right now, and unfortunately, the Democrat Party, in my opinion, has been co-opted so vigorously, far worse than the Republican Party even, that even the people that, 10 years ago, you would have said these types of progressives are the most anti-war, anti-foreign invasion. Now they're the biggest supporters. They are totally, now that it's their guy doing it, they're all in. They're like, but those few that remain, I might disagree with. Hell, they might be totally opposite of me on economic policy, but that issue of that corruption, they stand firm on. And so I say, on that issue, I'm willing to work with you. So I agree. There are compromises that are necessary when we're desperate for a win, right? Like you said, we're hostages. So that's sort of.
I want to talk about as vague as I can.
I'm listening. Go ahead. But
about that box. Sure. Here's the strategy I use to convince a person on the left to side with me about, the Second Amendment, right? They like empirical evidence. They like things that happenings in the world. So showcase them some. There are videos, there are compilation of videos when there was an election in Belarus where Lukashenko yet again won a few years ago. A lot of people in this country protested against that election, and many outside observers believe that there was something nefarious going on there. There was some fortification, whatever it is. People went out into the street by the million across all swaths of society. There were people that stood a lot to lose from the collapse of the government. Subsidized industry workers went out to protest against that election. The people who would be directly impacted by their industries competing in Europe and pretty much getting shut down. They still stood up. Women were out in the street. Men were there was a lot of CAA sort of help flowing there as well, probably because they're always there. But a lot of it was natural and organic, and it lasted for months. And what happened to them is it was televised. They were beat up. And their screams were broadcast outside the prison. They would take a group of people, beat them up, and then take the next group of people, beat them up, and then they would go into a residential neighborhood, like a swarm of cops going in and just grabbing again, and you have videos of that. And nobody could do anything because they lack one of the key boxes. They're not a threat. And you have to use your empathy. As the leftist, you like to empathize. Put yourself in the position of one of the cops. The reason why the cop is beating up the protester is not because he's a literal devil. It's because he's utilitarian. He says, listen, I like the current government. I'm willing to do things for it. I have a family to feed. If I get fired, that's it for me. I'm a criminal. So if I escape somewhere, I'll be potentially judged for it. I can't really escape. My entire life depends on it. And that protester, I'm just giving him a beating, just wising him up. I'm not going to kill him. He's going to have a few blue marks. It's going to be painful. He's going to learn from the experience. He's going to stop showing up to protests. And that person, that cop is right. That's exactly what happens. You get beat up once. If you're really ideologically strong, you go into the street again. If the beatings continue, eventually you stop showing up. And then the system is one for your generation. In a generation, something else might happen. But for your generation,
right?
No resistance. That is what happened in Russia since 2012. So now a Russian is escaping out of Russia, arrives in Europe, and people are angry at Russians in Europe right now for a good reason. They say, why didn't you do something about that Putin guy? Why didn't you protest harder? Why didn't you protest harder? I'll tell you right now why. Because we have similar video from even more protests than Belarus, even over longer, over a stretch of 10 years. There were Bolsheviks, like lefties, lefty anarchists, national Bolsheviks that would walk out. The 31st paragraph of the Russian Constitution gives you the right to peacefully protest. They would walk out every 31st of every month for years until their leader died, and they would get beat up, imprisoned, some of them selectively imprisoned for 10 years plus. They would keep doing it. A group of people in society. Others did it once a year during the elections or whatever. And but Vladimir Putin has won. The beatings won in Russia. Gradual decrease until nothing. Almost nobody shows up anymore, including the recent ones. The Far East, at the same time as Belarus, the Far East, they changed one of the governors, accused him of some old murder. People really liked their local governor, so they protested. They protested for 4 months straight. The entire city, after work, would get into the street and live on the street as a protest. Vladimir Putin and the cops allowed them to just do it. After 4 months, it was done. It's all about the fourth box. There is never the price for the individual police officer is never to kill you. He knows that he will not have to kill you. Because of that, he's willing to pay that price. It psychologically enables his violence. If you translate all of this lesson to the United States, look at which protests are the most peaceful. I'm not going to name them. Just look back through American history of the past 20 years. Where was a really strong protest movement that was really peaceful, where nobody got hurt during the protests and everything was fine?
I know.
Virginia, very peaceful.
They cleaned up the town afterwards. It's
very peaceful.
No violence.
And the police, when the police show up to that protest, they show up in white uniforms with gloves. Oh, guys, please stop.
Right.
Think why that happens.
And
it shouldn't do anything, right?
Right. Well, that's the
peaceful.
point. That's the real point, right? Like you mentioned, you're not a pacifist, myself neither, but I sympathize with that viewpoint. Right? If you choose through your own free will to not engage in violence, even in self-defense, that's your right. I think not the choice I would make, but that's your right. So I respect the person that says, I don't want to use a gun, therefore people shouldn't have. I don't respect that, but I understand saying, even if I had the gun, I wouldn't want to use it. The beauty of the Second Amendment and the right to self-defense is its existence makes its use less likely, right? The idea that you have the right to defend yourselves makes it less necessary to defend yourself. So even the pacifist benefits through people's right to self-defense. And there's no coincidence that so many horrendous crimes occur in gun-free zones. Penn and Teller did an excellent episode on this on their show Bullshit, right? Where it was their plan was, let's give every woman in the country a pink handgun. Right? They can do whatever they want with it. They can take it back, whatever. Do you think, knowing that the perch snatcher going down the street or the rapist about to grab that woman and throw her in the park, you think they'll think twice now? Knowing there's a better than not chance this woman's armed. Of course not. right? And that's just
Great
individuals.
equalizer, yes.
That's right. That's just individuals when it comes to the government. And I mean, this is beyond debate. There's a reason that the first thing authoritarian governments want to do is stop your speech and they're intertwined. And to the people that say, well, I'm a free speech advocate, but the Second Amendment goes too far, I say they are intertwined. Without the ability to defend yourself, you have no free speech. And if you have no free speech, you sort of don't have an ability to defend yourself. Like the First and Second Amendments are intrinsically intertwined in a way that's it's so simple, but it's almost so simple that you don't realize it,
How can they even argue after 2020 through 2022? How can they even argue that after all of the protests that happened against the lockdowns? You had, listen, I'll call it fascistic. Right? It's not actual. There's no blood and soul. It's not fascism, but fascistic is like a good definition. When you say that Target can remain open or in Walmart can remain open, but my store can't remain open, even though I'm willing to take more precautions than them in any pandemic, and everything is voluntary, and everybody is wearing the proper amount of protection, that's an issue, and that issue occurred even in our country. So I don't know what demonstration, they ask, give us examples, what furthermore do you want? The most fascistic countries in the past 2 years have been the one with all the restrictions on self-defense, where the police were like, I was skeptical about the prison experiment, the Stanford prison experiment, because it's full of nonsense.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah.
But listen, I have videos of police in Australia, those nice gentlemen, doing things to women, to harmless
choking women for not wearing a mask, right? Your respiratory system will fail if you don't wear this mask, so we will choke you out. We'll end your respiratory system.
They did build never again. They just build a bunch of camps.
Yep.
But those camps are nicer this time.
They put out TikTok videos of attractive women at the camps, like, we're having the propaganda was. It was surreal. To me, it was, I don't know if you're a fan of Jordan Peterson. He certainly does a lot I don't like. But one of the things that stuck with me the most, right? One of the things that stuck with me the most was when he said that he was studying history and the Nazis and things like that. And he said, when he realized he could have been one of them. And that stuck with me because everybody thinks they're special. Sure. Everybody thinks that, and this is the problem of the big government statist, right? Everybody says, when they say communism, what they really mean is, if I was in charge, then everything would be all right. But you're wrong. You're just wrong. Because there is no person even if you were the 1 in a billion chance that you had that moral fortitude to continue to operate in a totally objective way, like someone would take you out and then they would be. And like when you see like what happened in places, in some places in the United States, but you're absolutely right. It was worse in places like Australia where they were putting people in camps, or videos coming out of China. You could really see what happened, how the Nazis started, right? The idea that, or how the Bolsheviks, or the communist Stalin, it was surreal that it's happening in our lifetime, and it was the way people were talking, even in the United States. We need to punish these people. We will make their life suffer. To me, the number that still no one talks about, a YouGov poll showed that 30-something% of Democrats, 31% of Democrats, I believe, thought that if you weren't vaccinated, you should not be allowed to have your children in your home. I mean, That's incredible. They're literally saying, we will come into your home and remove your children. But you know what's preventing them? That you have an ability to defend yourself. And if you didn't, there's a chance that number might get from 30% to 50%. And then all of a sudden they start saying, well, we've legally said we have the right for their own benefit to take your children away. And so I'm with you.
It becomes very practical suddenly. Hey, listen, it's not going to be a dead man. It's just going to be a beat up man that's crushed. And the police are going to be fine with it because it's the cost is going to be acceptable to the utilitarian part of their mind. We're all slightly once we accept a certain rule system, the implementation is purely utilitarian. Can we afford it? Right? In the crudest form. And And that's actually that's a very strong insight. And you see again, all of this gets absolutely ignored, because they never have a basis for their arguments. It's all about power. And here's a good reference. There's a book called Dictator's Handbook. I forgot the author. There is a channel on YouTube that did a quick video about it called CGP Grey, and the video is called Rules for Rulers. It has, I believe, several parts. And what it presents to you is the actual mechanism of why you will be replaced. And it's a market mechanism. It's because the amount of money you need to distribute to the people to stay in power is actually quite low. North Korea is a good proof for that, right? You can't reach North Korea levels immediately or Venezuela levels immediately, but if you gradually cook this python, he will stay in the pot, or the frog, right? If you do it gradually, the level of human tolerance is like really low or like high for negative things. Mm-hmm. So the people in power, and that's sort of what's happening. But the levers of power now in a democracy, when you have voting, the levers of power are the various voting blocks. And so you have to sort of, talk to Latinos, talk to African Americans, talk to this group of Latinos, talk to Cuban Latinos, talk to Russians, talk to Hispanics, talk to Germans. You have to negotiate between these groups. Then they vote for you and some magic happens and only a small minority of people gets oppressed, right? And that therefore it's good. Well, that has some moral issues, and some ethical issues, but also that depends on those votes being a total representative of those groups and you actually having control of the ballot box. As that becomes more abstract, right, in recent years, becomes a question of how much even influence those people have. And who gains the influence then? It's whoever has the real power. So that's why Tucker Carlson had a brilliant show about BLM in 2020. It's like, look who has real power in the country momentarily. Right. Now, the power could have been taken away from them instantly by the FBI and CIA. Just eliminate the top, just not eliminate a skill, just imprison in a secret location for half a month. The entire structure at the bottom would be scared shitless, and the whole movement would deflate instantly. And also no more weird companies providing busing services to these groups, right? All of it can be shut down in one day. And yet, while it was allowed by the state to occur, it instantly seized monopoly on violence, monopoly on morals, and all the corporations lined up and displayed the symbols and paid millions of dollars to the instantly. That's how power really works. If somebody has that power, everybody else lines up, and it's not yours. And it works everywhere except certain neighborhoods that have a certain other form of power that increases the cost of messing with them.
Right. Yeah, that's absolutely. So I want you to shout out your show, but I have one other question that I thought would be interesting. I cheer for people in this country to do great, around the world, in fact, no matter what. Sometimes that might mean I'm wrong. I didn't like Joe Biden, right? But I would have been happy to have been proven wrong in 2020. I would have been happy for, the lockdowns to cease, the energy costs to go down, people to thrive. I would have been happy. To me, as someone coming from your perspective as a libertarian, I don't think you could write a book identifying why you're correct about the evils of the state that would be more prescient than what we just saw for 2 years. Like we were talking, the lockdowns, the mass spending, the inflation, the intentional sort of just meanness of how they treated people that were dissidents. Do you ever find it odd that you're proven right, but you're not happy to be? That you're you saw it coming, you knew what was going to come, but it's kind of bittersweet because real people suffered. People's parents died in nursing homes alone and afraid. People's children, were abused and not being able to go to school, not being able to develop speech or get proper medications. it's a weird feeling for me, and I just wondered what you thought of that, like to be someone who's been talking about this and then be proven so right.
So I think I can be a little bit optimistic, particularly about the United States. I think that the illusion that they're maintaining is very fragile. I think reality corrects it really, really fast, rapidly. As Jim Bob, I'll quote him again. Problems that disappear with starvation, and also problems that disappear when you start working. When you work at a job that produces something, when you take care of people, in like the homeless, in the people with disabilities, when you work with various institutions where you produce something, when you have a business, when you get taxed, and when you see how your money is misspent, when you become an adult, that is where you join our side in one capacity or the other, become an ally. So I'm optimistic about that. I'm also optimistic about the fact that I had ancestors that lived through the entire 70 years of the Soviet Union. A much more directly oppressive system, maybe less refined. And the paradox of that system is that it's super powerful. It's like this giant that towers over you and can, the snap of your finger, pluck you and make you disappear. But also it's full of incompetence and rot, and it's all falling apart as it grows, which is the exact paradox that you see in the Biden administration. I think that I know what their goals are, is to, like, the WEF openly declares those goals to the entire planet. They're that brazen, right? They tell you it's going to be everything digitized, everything for rent. You will own nothing and you will be happy, whatever they decide that means. But also, I can't imagine them implementing that successfully without just collapsing. The collapse is in progress. So that's why I think advocacy is actually important right now, why the Libertarian Party was absolute garbage under the previous administrations, and Mrs. Caucus and Dave Smith and even a New Hampshire branch that are totally batshit insane from time to time, they're still doing a better job because they're talking about all of this. They're trying to ride that wave. You're doing a good job of it, Rob. And so I think that I'm sort of optimistic. I can't be pessimist because I think other people had it worse.
Yeah.
And they had children, and even the situation, if the situation was hopeless, they wouldn't spend so much time on the propaganda. It's so ineffective that works against them. I can release their propaganda for them and gain people to my side. Yep. It's that bad.
Totally true.
And I can't invent things as horrible as they do. Like, it even affects people like Destiny that have to apologize for the state 24/7. That's what he does. And yet he lives in Clown World, and it's Clown World keeps punching at him from various sides, right? Sort of enjoys that. So I think if I remember the question correctly, I am sort of optimistic about our prospects. I think we should keep fighting across all different avenues that we can.
Well, then I think that listen, you are more grounded than most people that probably listen to me in this sense. You've been experiencing being a dissident for far longer, right? Like someone who's like an ANCAP, right? It's not like, oh, I had it good under George Bush, the right one. Like, no. And I, as a Ron Paul Republican, it was similar with me. It's like my guy lost in 2008. My guy lost in 2012. Trump is someone that I actively supported. That gave hope. But you also look at it in the big picture and you're like, is it really so different now as far as the pessimism than it was when Ron Paul was getting screwed over in 2008? No, not really. And the one thing I know for sure is this. If we give up fighting, we lose. That's absolutely certain. So to me, I sleep well knowing I might not be perfect. I might not be the smartest person, but I have a sense of morality and I've done some diligence and I'm advocating for what I think's not just good for me, but good for the people of this country. And if we lose, we lose. But it's not so many people. I just see this depression of like, oh, this midterm was the final nail. I don't feel that. You might be right politically, right? But there's all sorts of things happening. You see, like, culturally, people waking up, like, that used to self-censor about stuff that are like, you're going a bridge too far. You're absolutely right. The incompetence, the hubris of them just announcing, this is what we want for you. And people are, like, raising eyebrows. And it takes a few people at first to stand up, but then it builds and builds and builds, where now you see, okay, maybe we're not winning big movements at the national level of politics, but school boards are going crazy with regular average people that are running for school board saying, enough of this shit, enough. And to me, I see hope everywhere. I recognize when there was a loss. I do think the midterms were a loss, but I also see hope in ways outside of just the national political structure. So I am trying to make it a point to let people know at this time, don't get overly depressed. Like, it's not worth it. Don't go out and do something. Yeah, it's just keep plugging.
The most depressed people, I'll shout out another community that you should pay attention to as a dissident. It's not the nicest community for various reasons. There's a YouTuber called Academic Agent. He has a very interesting channel. He has live streams I'm not a fan of, but the topical videos are really interesting, and they really challenge you. He's always does something provocative that riles up his entire community and leads to fights and interpretations. I think that's good, even if he's sometimes wrong.
Right.
That's just very healthy. Just take an idea and freaking run with it, because his idea inspires me from time to time, and I find the right way to present what he's presenting, or I find some kernel of truth there. And he's very pessimistic. He believes that populism, which is what we're sort of doing, won't work. He believes that Trump will fail. He believes that everything nothing will work. The only thing that will work is the thing we can't talk about, and so he can't talk about it. And so what is his proposal then? His proposal is radical self-improvement. Radical self-improvement. You have to be 10 out of 10 in your personal life, in your professional life, in your political life, in your ideological understanding. You have to have a network of these tens of these people who are super solid, and there's enough of them where they can't be targeted. They don't have a following. They're not key in any system. They're not planning anything. They're just analyzing and providing interpretations, and they're storing and they're building up their own strength and their own community. That's what you want to be doing, because you want to be able to say, when the collapse happens, how to form the new government, right? And to say, no, this cannot be there for any reason. That person can do something else for the rest of his life, and his children, by the way, right? Non grata, lustration is a key word. Permanent retirement, peaceful retirement on your farm. You're out of the political life, and political life has to be based on these ideals. Now, I believe that the core should be based on my ideals, because they allow every particular group, Christian nationalists, robnoerr, classical liberals, everybody can coexist in my system. And we should have all of those experiments run parallel to each other, federated to provide, whatever minimum that makes you sleep at night against the Chinese invasion, right? So I'm fine with that level of minarchism to start until we're developed as a species to get rid of it. I'm perfectly realistic. So, but we should become that strong. It means that in my personal life, I have to fix some things, like I have to improve my presentation. I have a lot of work to do on all of those, right? All of that matters. Ideology, physical strength, family life, everything. And then, because when then you can use opportunities when opportunities emerge, but also support all other activities. Less infighting against people who are ideologically similar or enemies of the state. Enemies in a positive sense, in a happy sense, right? So,
it's brilliant. It's brilliant. Yeah, no, it's brilliant because I've been doing a series, who to point the finger at for the midterms, right? And the first episode I did was me, right? Because the way I look at it is this. I might be very low on the bar of influence and power and things like that. But the people that are higher, like just say Trump or Schumer or Pelosi or Feinstein, I have zero access to them, right? So if you're doing an equation, I might have 0.0000001% chance to influence something, but I have 100% chance to control the direction that goes, right? With those people that have a higher percentage to influence, I have no chance to influence them. So before every failure is an opportunity to learn something and say, what can I do better? And I've always, it's cliche, but I always appreciated failures in my life because to me, it's sobering as to say like, okay, I can't start pushing back until I hit rock bottom. Politically, it's the same thing. Have we hit rock bottom? Well, not historically. Like historically, it could get way, way worse. It can. But maybe we have. Maybe we'll start going. But nonetheless, like if you're unwilling to admit like, here's where it went wrong. Here's what I did. Here's what groups like me did. And then branch out from there. And then you could point the finger and say, this is where Trump's at fault. This is where the national GOP's at fault, right? This is where social media comes. But you have to start with yourself. And to me, there is optimism in that because I know I could change myself, right? And so if it starts with me and I know I could change myself, why get blackpilled? There's always, now I might lose, I might die in a car wreck tomorrow and the goals that I wanted were never, but I know that it is never as bleak as it could be as long as I'm alive because I could always improve myself and thereby by improving myself, improve the country or the society that I want to see. And so I hope that I impart that. And I think it's, the way you put that is radical self-improvement. That is amazing. I had not termed it that way, but I think that that's a great message for people to be like, you dust yourself. I'm not saying don't be pissed. Of course, be pissed. Of course. But understand, don't get blackpilled. Don't be one of those anti-Trumpers screaming at the sky that they're making memes about. It's like, okay, I was streaming with you election night. Were we screaming at the sky? Of course not. We're just like, it sucks. But
there's also another white pill is that a lot of people are like, they're taught from school to be scientific, to like trust the science. Even though now we're mocking trust the science for obvious reasons,
right?
But actually we're still within that mindset. So I disagree with some people who are science skeptics because I think they also go overboard, like all of those various theories they have. They open the various folders. I don't have as many crazy folders about the way our world is structured. But one of the folders that keeps amazing me is that over optimism about general AI. They'll invent this method that will seek out and destroy every dissident. Will line up on all of their radars and they'll be able to just gather all of us instantly and destroy us. No, it's still a bunch of nonsense. They still can't meme. They can't even meme. The art robots. Speak to a real classical artist. There's those show up on YouTube from that time. What their evaluation of that new brush that they invented is. It's trust me, it's not. It lacks the substance of what makes искусство, of what makes creative process, what creation means. It lacks that humanity. It's a great tool to use as a practicing person, right? So there's a black pill in that they get better tools to track us and control us. The white pill is that we're doing the same, and the people that work for them aren't that competent, and we're sort of quite a bit ahead of the game. And they're filing for bankruptcy all the time. Elon Musk buys something like 20 monkeys to implement his brain connection that terrifies the right wingers in certain circles. You should look up what happened to those poor animals. Nothing good. That contract is void. Is he going to succeed at some point? Not anytime soon. There's issues. Is it going to become widespread and be able to control you? Likely not. So I have an optimistic view. I think technology has a limit. We're plateauing. We're not super accelerating into a singularity, as they say. Therefore, our power as people is still going to be very, very significant.
Yeah,
it is still a flesh and blood world type of thing.
Yeah, well said. And for me, even if it wouldn't be, we can do nothing but act ourselves, right? We could control nothing but ourselves, and so the nihilism of total, of the black pill is, to me, it's unacceptable. I use this guy, Steve Ranella, a lot. He has this show, Meat Eater. And there's this episode where he's filming him and he's tracking down this buck that he shot. And he's like, when I hunt, I'm always pessimistic with my mind, but optimistic with my feet. Right? And so what he's saying is, in my head, I'm like, this shit ain't going to work. But his actions belie that. His actions are, I have one choice, and that choice is to act in this way as if it will work. Because if I don't act in that way, it won't work. And so even if you're like, look, what's the sense of voting in 2024? What's the sense? They'll steal the vote and whatever. Well, the sense is, once you reach that point, they don't even have to steal it. Right? So you still, and it's not just voting, there's all sorts of, but you have to act as if, and maybe you're right, maybe it won't matter, but nonetheless, you have 0% chance of affecting change if you're just like, well, I give up. I'm just going to, so I think I think you're absolutely right. I'm going to get you out of here. I got it. My wife needs me to go downstairs, but I would love for you to shout out your channels. I'll have a link below to all your channels, but if you could just briefly tell people where they could find you and when you're usually putting videos up.
Not yet. There's some demand, and I'm working on some scripts, but you can find my writings from time to time on Free Kasimir on Twitter. I'm not violating any Twitter rules, so I think that I'll stay there for quite a while under new ownership, which I'm quite optimistic about, despite all the naysayers. I think what I see is mostly correct, as expected. It's a fight. I like it. So you can find my writings there. I try not to spam you if you follow me, so please don't mute. I try not to argue with people too much in the comments either. So you will definitely see my analysis on things that happen. And once I start producing content, it will be featured there, probably Substack and videos for sure. And I always, when I find something that I believe you deserve to watch, that explains the point very quickly and well, I will present it on my channel as well. Thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. It was a blast. I know we've been sort of talking around each other, just like as guests on different panels and stuff. So it was great to have you in here and finally have a conversation. Really enjoyed it. Please check out Kasimir's Twitter channel. And I'll also put the links to a lot of those books below that you recommended as well, so people could check that out as well. So thank you so much. Oh, go ahead.
A lot of them are free, by the way. You can get them from Mrs.org.
All right. Sounds great. All right. Well, thank you again, and we'll talk to you soon, man.
Take care.
We'll see. All right. Thanks, Kasimir. I don't know. Yeah, you're still here. Thanks so much, man. I thought that went really well. It's, one of the things that I think...
live still?
Yeah, we're still live, but that video's done. So I'm going to put that video up as its own thing so that people that are, that'll be there for... The live stream people a lot of times don't watch, even if it's just me and you and I end it. But if you put an actual video with a thumbnail, it's there for posterity, and it'll be up on Rumble.
If you do have to leave, we're like...
Yeah, I got like 2 minutes. I just wanted to say thanks because as the first guest, I'm still feeling out what I want the show to be. And I thought it hit the right tones of, me trying to add input where I could, but you really explaining the situation. So I hope that people listening, because you have to know this, it's an uphill battle advocating for ANCAP. There's a lot of people that's just like, it's not possible. And I thought you did a really, one of the things that I think is important is explaining to people in a practical real world situation of, okay, even if we can't get there, here's why heading in that direction is of benefit. Right. And I think you did a great job with that.
Yeah,
so
I don't care if they want to head there. I just want them to keep that in mind. And so that was my goal. And I did try to balance. I talk way too much, so I did try to balance.
No, I thought it was very good. I mean, that's the point. Okay. I'm certainly a talker, as we both know. So I'm hoping that
I frustrated you a lot today.
No. Well, people were saying you looked like you were my son, which I was like, now listen, I don't know how old you are. I'm 38, so I'm guessing you're like 26, 27. Am I right about that?
No, you're off.
So you're probably not my son.
I'm not. Okay. I'm never revealing my age.
It's the white beard hair, man. It's killing me. It's I'm gonna get trimmed up this week, audience. I promise. But no,
I'm heading there, but I don't know. We all have different genetics.
Yeah. But no, I do thoroughly appreciate it, and hopefully I'll get to talk to you soon. But yeah, keep me updated. By the way, I appreciate you sending me stuff on Discord and Twitter. I really do appreciate it. I do. A lot of times I read that. Listen, the state came through our house at work this week. It was a nightmare. The incompetence of the people that I work with. Well, I should be careful. Maybe some of them are watching. Incompetent's not the right word.
Great people.
They are great people, but a lot of them are new, right? So they don't understand. They don't understand when you're dealing with bureaucrats. Sometimes a measure of ass kissing is sort of necessary. They don't get that, right? So I had to prepare for like let me tell you a little secret. If you ever work in home health care with someone like developmental disabilities and someone's coming in from the state to check the cleanliness of your house, if you lead with, I think you'll find the house very clean. The gentleman that I take care of helped me all last night. They're very reticent to say, well, he did a terrible job. They're like, oh, that's wonderful. Like, so I've been busting my ass,
There's another quick trick for that's going to be a scoop for the people viewing on Twitch. Listen, if you're going to sell something to somebody who's like a nosy client, picky client, like the state, like some government official that has to approve everything, one of the things they're trying to do is they're trying to get some power out of you. They're trying to get the feeling that they're empowered. Leave a dirty sock in like a prominent space.
That's totally true.
Focus on that dirty sock. They'll say, "What is this?" And you say, "Oh no!" And it'll diffuse their desire to. They'll say, "Do better next time," and they'll get that kick out of fixing stuff for you.
It's always, even with police, when you're dealing with police, it's a very similar thing, right? Like where you can acknowledge, if you acknowledge a small thing, right? Like it's amazing to me. I never understood it. Even if you have absolute hatred for police, like do your time in court. When that cop shows, be the most affable person you can imagine, right? Oh, thank you. My taillight was out. Yeah. I didn't know that. Thank you so much. I know, like my uncle, one time he got rear-ended because his taillights weren't working. So yeah, I really appreciate it. And like, then the cop's like, oh, well, I'm glad I could tell you that, right? Like, and just that little thing. I never understood the antagonism. Maybe something I need to work on when it comes to the state in general, because I'm dealing with, I'd love to talk to you and Fabian someday. I'm in this weird crossroads where I actually have connections to the Pennsylvania GOP that runs it. And so I'm debating, do I go scorched earth, which, like screw all these people, they're abysmal failures? Or do I try to be like, look, they did a poor job, but I need to work within them. So I maybe don't come on here and start naming names and say, this person sucks, this person sucks. It's a weird line to draw, because pragmatically, it's like, if I want to affect change, I might have a small measure of chance if I'm in a room with these people eating dinner, like, listen, this is what you need to do. But I ain't getting in that room if I come on here and say, Jim Smith's a piece of shit. He's just running the GOP because he's, it's a tough line to walk. Maybe given my advice on how to deal with police, I should take the latter line there. But nonetheless, I got to go let the dogs out. So the wife's going to be, I appreciate it, Kasimir. We'll talk to you soon, man.
For sure. Take care.
All right. Take care. Leave. There we go. All right. Audience, thanks for sticking with me. Last thing I'll say, I'm not going to stick around long, but I will say this. If you have any suggestions on how I can improve that sort of interview show, if you liked it, if you didn't like it, if you have ideas for guests, let me know on my email. It's rob.noerr@gmail.com. An even better place to let me know, because I check it quite frequently, would be Twitter. So I have the ability to message me, private message me on Twitter. It's open. My Twitter handle, I'll type it in there. It's @NorRobert, because like Kasimir, I didn't understand how to register. So it's NOERR and then ROBERT. So that's my handle on Twitter. Send me a message, say, hey, you might be interested in this guest, or here's what I think you could have done better with this format. But it is something that I think that I'm interested in doing, to hear from both people that agree with me and people that tangentially agree. I'm not interested in hearing from a bunch of dirty statist lefties. I don't care. I'll debate those people, but this was a different format. At the end of the day, I think people that know me know that I'm not ANCAP, but I think that what I'm trying to do here is to allow those views of the person that I'm interviewing to come out, and so that people can make their own decisions. So it's not really about me influencing you as to whether or not. Now, that doesn't mean I won't say, well, I'll push back some here or there, but that's different than a debate. If I'm debating someone, then I'm just going to be like, this is why I'm right. So, yeah, Kasimir's in here. So I do appreciate Kasimir. coming on. If you have, please consider giving him a follow on Twitter. And like I said, if you have anything for improvements of the show, possible guests, stylistically things I could be doing different, just let me know. I know I don't get back to everyone, but I swear to you that I really appreciate it. Why are you saying Twitter's freaking out? Goodbye, Twitter. Am I missing something? Something crazy happened? I mean, I've been streaming for 2.5 hours, but before I came on, it didn't look like Twitter was freaking out that bad. Are you talking about the fact that Elon Musk locked a bunch of people out of the office? Yeah, I don't blame him. Twitter seems to be working similarly to how it always has for me. So, lefties are going apeshit. Oh, that's. By the way, one quick thing I'll say. I put a tweet out about this. I was pretty busy today, but when you hear lefties say, "Oh, Jim Jordan and them came out and they're going to investigate Hunter Biden and Joe Biden," that's what they're going to do instead of fight inflation. Ignore them. Ignore them. They are not good faith. These are people that the entire Trump presidency until now, even after Trump was out of office, their number one agenda was investigating Trump. Under their guidance, inflation is terrible. The border is terrible. Crime is terrible. The lockdowns were terrible. The indoctrination of kids is terrible. They have done nothing. Their primary issue is to say people that vote against us are voting against democracy and having a primetime January 6th committee. When people say, "Oh, you're not going to fight inflation, you're going to talk about these issues," what they're trying to do is to shame you because they're begging you, please don't treat us like we treated you. So I say, let the investigations fly. Now, will those investigations amount to anything? Probably not, like as far as people going to jail and things like that. But the idea that I will be shamed by people that sought to lock up peaceful protesters, to investigate their opponents ad nauseum, that I will be shamed in saying, now it's time that we lost the House to start dealing with issues, is laughable. It is absolutely laughable. Make fun of every single left-winger you hear saying that. Oh, they're just going to do these investigations. It's laughable. So I'm not going to rate anyone because I do have to get downstairs. So I hope you enjoyed the show. I'll try to have that recording up within a day or two so you could just watch the actual recording of me and Kasimir as a full show. So check out for that. And when it gets up there, I'll make sure I put it on Twitter and YouTube, and it should be on Rumble as well. Please consider sharing that on your social media platforms. I think it would be nice to our guest Kasimir and other future guests if we could actually get some eyeballs on those sorts of things. So I'd really appreciate it. So thank you so much, everyone. I really appreciate all of your support. I think we ended on a high note there, talking about how self-improvement and things like that are reasons to not get black-pilled. No matter how bad you think things look, it's all right. Like, there's still things you could do. So, yeah. But I should be on tomorrow around 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll be doing the final regular show of the week, no guest. So it should be a good one. Thank you so much. And as always, have a good one.